You can feel comfort in storing your private belongings inside lockers and other storage devices. However, sometimes the private belongings found inside these storage devices are rather strange and disturbing.
Number 10.
The only time it's acceptable to keep around a headless doll is the 5 minutes between the dog ripping the head off and you discovering it. When someone stores a headless doll among knives, it's most likely a problem. Robert Dewey Hoskins, who was rearrested after escaping from a mental hospital in February of 2012, was convicted of threatening to murder Madonna, and that headless baby doll was found in his storage unit in Long Beach. LA Weekly reports on the 10 creepiest items found in the Madonna stalker's storage unit. Besides the headless baby doll and dozens of knives, Hoskins kept a very scary clown mask, a sumo wrestler baby doll, a Barbie backpack, and so much more.
Number 9.
A married couple with 2 kids made a horrific discovery when the mother, Mrs. Copeland, found a safe in her 10-year-old son's room. When questioned about where he got it and its contents, he simply pleaded the fifth. Both parents were unable to get any info out of their son. Eventually, Mr. Copeland was able to pry the safe open and was shocked at what he found inside. The head of their dog that had recently passed and was buried in their yard was stuffed into the safe. Blood poured out of the box as Mr. Copeland screamed in horror. Their son said he loved that dog so much that he wanted to have a part of her forever, so he dug up the body, cut off its head with a tiny kitchen knife, and stuffed it in the safe that was found by the mother later on that same day.
Number 8.
Some people like to take their work home with them, but Dr. Michael Birkland, a former medical examiner, took his work to his storage unit in Pensacola. And when I say work, I'm talking about body parts for more than 100 people. All this creepiness was discovered in August 2012 when some poor soul bought the contents of Dr. Birkland's unit at a storage auction. It seems that Dr. Birkland's hobby included the storing of 10 brains as well as other body parts like lungs, hearts, and tissue samples. Dr. Birkland was thrifty as well as creepy, keeping a heart stored in a styrofoam cup. Police noted that formaldehyde was leaking from the cracked lid. The body parts, which were harvested during private autopsies performed inside funeral homes in Florida, were also found inside Tupperware containers, trash bags, and specimen cups. Interestingly, Dr. Birkland was fired from his job as a medical examiner in 2003 for failing to complete autopsy reports in a timely manner and for keeping a big backlog of cases.
Number 7.
Unit B8 in U-Store Self-Storage in Clearwater, Florida, held something that couldn't be auctioned off when the family fell behind on payments in January of 2012. When the storage facility manager told the family that the contents were going to be sold, the truth came out. Among the banana boxes and old TVs rested the grandma's skeletal remains. Authorities identified the grandma as Anne Bunch, born on January 1st, 1900. Since the woman's death in 1995, her remains had been stored inside a painted blue coffin in a storage unit that wasn't air-conditioned. For 17 years, her remains rested inside a warm storage unit. The body had been properly prepared for burial by a funeral home in Alabama, which explains the lack of odor.
Number 6.
A lot of people refuse to go to public pools, and maybe this will be one more reason. An elderly man named Jacob Pastor, who swam in a public pool in Colorado, used the same locker in the changing room every time he visited. A lot of the lockers went unused, as most people didn't even need to use them, and it wasn't a very crowded pool to begin with. One unfortunate day, however, perhaps he had tired himself out a little too much and opened the wrong locker, the one right next to his usual one. The skeletal remains of a human fell out from the locker almost as if it were tackling him to the ground. By the looks of it, the body that once was had been in there for years, as it was fully decomposed. It looked as though somebody had been forcefully jammed in there, or perhaps they simply got stuck in there themselves. That mystery will remain unsolved.
Number 5.
Imager user Oldswagon is a reformed thief who earns money on the side by unlocking safes for people, but little did he know that this job could lead to him helping solve a vile crime. A landlord contacted the lockmaster to help him bust into a safe that one of his tenants had left behind. but neither of them were prepared for what was lurking inside. Once Oldswagen had disabled the lock by hot wiring it, the safe swung open and revealed that things would have gone very differently if he had used an acetylene torch to bust through the door, because inside, as pictured, they found a live grenade. Unfortunately, the live grenade was one of the more innocent items concealed within the safe's near impenetrable metal walls. The SD cards pictured were all filled with child pornography, and the journal was so depraved that Oldswagen wrote, "I thumbed through it, and I won't tell you what was in it so that you could actually sleep tonight." The authorities were informed of the upsetting material, and all of the items pictured were confiscated to help find the perpetrator, who is believed to have been running a child pornography ring.
Number 4.
In Fort Collins, Colorado, 1987, a school locker was searched after the murder of a local girl named Peggy Hetrick, and the police never forgot what they found. Timothy Lee Masters' locker was crammed full of over 2,200 pages of violent writings and horrific drawings of mutilated bodies, with some of them resembling the scene where Hetrick was murdered. The 15-year-old pupil was found guilty at trial and sentenced to life imprisonment, but he was eventually acquitted in 2008 when advances in forensic science cleared him of acting out his sick fantasies in real life. Peggy Hetrick's killer has never been caught.
Number 3.
When Mr. Shannon Wisnett bought a barbecue smoker from an auction storage unit, it contained a human leg. The severed limb was wrapped in tinfoil, but when police traced its owner, the leg's origins turned out to be distinctly less murderous than they were expecting. The former owner of the storage unit, Mr. John Wood, was involved in a plane crash in 2004. That meant his leg had to be amputated below the knee. He opted to keep the limb so he could be buried with it, but somehow forgot that he had put it in storage.
Number 2.
When she was refurbishing a derelict home, Ann Contola discovered a wall safe hidden behind the plasterwork. Convinced it might hold something of value, she called the locksmith to crack it open. But instead of riches, she was greeted with a handful of human teeth.
Number 1.
Reddit user by the name of Lumberjack found a bizarre hidden crawlspace in his house, but it was the locked safe within that contained the most spine-chilling material. The tiny place designed to fit a water heater was carpeted and led to a mysterious black door that was locked. In order to be able to sleep in the house ever again, Lumberjack broke through the door and was greeted by a black sentry safe that was looming in the corner. When the safe was opened, it contained numerous VHS tapes that didn't seem to contain innocent home movies. "No, no, no, no" could be found written on one of the tapes. As if that weren't bad enough, there was also a chilling note in ominous dripping black ink, saying, "Save yourself." 8 months ago, Lumberjack told the Reddit community that he had turned in the tapes to the police.
This video was captured by a Reddit user's doorbell camera. He claims to have woken up to his dog going crazy outside, followed by a notification from the app Ring, saying motion was detected at his door. Upon opening the app, he's greeted to nothing but an eyeball looking directly into his camera, and a man whispering and mumbling to himself. He proceeds to knock and ring the doorbell. He then begins trying his luck at the doorknob and window, all the while still mumbling and whispering to himself. After the homeowner threatens to call the police, the man gets defensive and claims he was just looking for his dog, conveniently named Fido.
Okay, I was just looking for my dog, Fido. Whoa, you don't have to get all like that and stuff, honey. You know, we could be friends.
In this video, we see a man seemingly waiting to be led into a house. Whether it's his house or not is unknown. As he waits by the door, A strange animal-like transparent figure can be seen floating towards the door, and as it reaches and passes the man, he turns, possibly reacting to a sound he may have heard. These are two clips that were likely taken back during the entire clown epidemic of 2016. In this first clip, we see someone dressed as a clown wielding a small sword, lurking around by the front door for a bit and running off after ringing the doorbell. Similarly, in this next clip, someone dressed as a clown can be seen standing in the distance, looking at the front door. After a while, he approaches the door, seems to stare into the doorbell camera for a few seconds, then walks away. Whether these were pranks meant to scare the homeowners or not, most people wouldn't want to open their doors to these two. In this video, around 2 p.m., the man in the dark hoodie seen here apparently rang the doorbell and no one answered. The man who lives in this house was wearing headphones, therefore couldn't hear the doorbell. So the man in the hoodie likely presumed no one was home, and soon returned with his friend in the white hoodie around 15 minutes later. The man in the dark hoodie attempts to kick in the door while his friend in the white hoodie stands by. The man who owns the house is able to hear the loud bangs of the attempted burglar's foot hitting the door, and he yells out something unintelligible that scares the two men off. In this video, the camera catches a shirtless man approaching the door, but instead of actually ringing the bell or knocking on the door, he pretends to knock on the door. What you can't see on the screen is a car that's waiting for the man in front of the house. According to the homeowner, he could be seen talking to someone waiting in the car off camera later on. It's likely that the shirtless man was forced to do something by the person in the car, clearly something that he doesn't want to do given that he fakes an entire conversation with the homeowner, all the while checking to make sure the person in the car could see him talking.
Okay. Sorry about that. Sorry.
It was apparent he or the person in the car were looking for a person named Matt, who they thought lived in this house. One could only imagine what this man was put out to do to this Matt person. In this video, the doorbell camera detects motion, but seemingly nothing appears in the frame except for a small white orb that floats across the screen. Some paranormal investigators have referred to orbs appearing in pictures and videos from allegedly paranormal sources. Apparently, the orb in this video is significant enough to trip the motion sensors of the camera system. This one isn't a video, but rather a pretty disturbing picture caught by a Redditor's doorbell camera. After being woken up by a notification on their phone, they checked it to see a message saying, "Your doorbell detected a visitor." After checking the app, they didn't see anything, and as anyone would, assumed it was maybe a bug or a small animal that tripped the motion sensor. However, the Redditor received more notifications, and after checking the app again, was faced with this disturbing image. Whether it's even a male or female is almost impossible to tell, but perhaps the most disturbing part of the image is the shape and distance of the person's eyes. It's not something anyone would ever want to see at their front door. In this video, we see someone wearing a mask approaching the door and covering the doorbell with a piece of tape. The homeowner got an alert that motion was detected on the porch, and upon checking the footage was ready to grab his gun. It's not known what was done while the tape was covering the camera, but eventually one side of the tape peeled off, revealing the person in the mask was gone. The homeowner doesn't know if it was simply kids playing a prank or someone who meant him and his family harm. This video shows exactly why you should always check who's outside your door before opening it.
On the doorbell.
This doorbell camera caught two men in front of the house. One of them approaching the front door and ringing the doorbell, armed with a gun. He attempts to hide his face as he approaches the door, then hides off to the side, waiting for someone to open up. The other man walks down the sidewalk, waiting for his friend to do whatever he was about to do, but luckily nobody answered the door. This homeowner's camera captured two suspicious men pull up in their driveway and wait outside their front door. The one on the left quickly notices the camera and the two flee. But not even 15 minutes later, the two pull up into the homeowner's driveway again, having apparently decided they'd go through with the break-in anyway. This time, one of them immediately attempts to kick the door down, but the homeowner is ready this time and speaks through the doorbell speaker, claiming the police are on their way, scaring the two off for good this time. On September 10th, 2018, a Florida man wearing a bulletproof vest and carrying an assault rifle rang his neighbor's doorbell at 4 in the morning. The homeowner grabbed her two children and stayed put in the bathroom. After spotting the man on her security footage, she immediately called the police and her husband, who was out of town for work. Roughly 25 minutes later, the police arrived. The man faced aggravated assault charges. The homeowner said the daughter of the unnamed man had stayed at their home recently, claiming she was afraid of her own father. At some off hour in the night, this man's doorbell camera captures a mysterious, transparent-looking, blurry figure slowly moving down the sidewalk across the street. It closely resembles a human, and that's what most may assume. But the weird part of this one is that after reviewing the footage, the homeowner asked a neighbor who also had a camera to check their footage at the same time, and their footage didn't reveal the figure walking down the sidewalk.
A few years ago, something very weird happened with my best friend and I. I was 15 years old. One night I decided to sleep over at my friend's house. After a night of scary movies, we were in the mood to do something exciting. Not far from my friend's house was a demolishing site, a block of houses in a very terrible state that would be demolished the day after tomorrow. The local government would demolish them to make room for new houses. The whole site was fenced in and warning signs saying "Do not enter" hung everywhere. The houses were boarded up by planks. Doors and windows were sealed shut. No one could get in. We decided to go for a walk on the old block and take some random photographs. My friend knew a spot where we could enter the old block. When we walked there, we noticed that every house was boarded up tight, so we couldn't get in. We noticed a house with a window on the top floor that wasn't very well boarded up. We could see into the room. We took a photo with a digital camera.
Later, we went home and took a look at the pictures we made. Suddenly, we came across the photo of the window. We saw a woman dressed in a brown raincoat with white skin and black hair as long as we could visibly see. The woman looked very sad. We hadn't seen any woman up there when we took the picture. Moreover, the windows and doors were boarded. We went back to the house to see if that was correct. After investigation, it really was. Everything was tied shut, and there was no woman. This story isn't mine, but rather of my friend from Japan. I'll call him Rita. It happened back when Rita was only about 11 or 12 years old. Rita was a rather attractive kid and had his fair share of admirers. One girl was extreme with her crush though. I'll call her Ayano. Ayano was a lot older than Rita. She was 17. She was an acquaintance of Rita and lived down the road from him. Rita hadn't thought much of her until she started stalking him. Every day and every night, she would be following him one way or another, whether it be in person or online. Rita first started getting the creeps when she would start messaging him over 20 times a day. Stuff like, "Be safe," "Are you alright?" "Sleep well," etc. This was a little weird, but he overlooked it. Then the messages started getting creepier. Instead of the usual checkup emails, they got more personal. Things like, "You should eat your lunch," if he skipped lunch, or "I think your sister is hungry," when his little sister was crying. Rita stopped using both his phone and social media at this point, but it doesn't end there. Rita's mother was almost never home, so he was frequently looked after by babysitters. One day he had a new babysitter. It was Ayano. Nothing was particularly strange as she looked after him and his siblings, but she did get a lot closer to his mother than he would like. One day at school, Ayano approached Rita and told him that his mother would be out of the country for a week, and that she told her to let Rita stay at her house. Rita was hesitant at first, but hey, it was his mother's wish. He couldn't go against that. Ayano told him that his mother had already left, so he could go home with her after school that day. Rita reluctantly agreed and went home with her. When he got there, her parents weren't home. Things get a little blurry here as my friend choked up telling the story, as it still scares him today. He said Ayano would play weird games with him, stuff like Family, where she insisted she was the wife and he was the husband, as well as things like Cops and Robbers and games to see who would get scared first, where she would blindfold him and leave him in a silent room for hours on end. It was 5 days into staying at her house, and Ayano had gone to her part-time job. She had left the doors locked and the windows were too high to jump from, so he just stayed in front of the TV, where he saw a chilling news report. It was a missing child report, the missing child being him. Before he had the time to catch the number to call, the TV switched off, and Ayano was standing behind him with the remote in her hand. Rita had freaked out, crying and screaming. Ayano held him, but he managed to wiggle from her grasp just in time to open a window and cry for help. Luckily for him, a couple were walking past, heard his cries and called the police. Within an hour, police arrived and found him locked in her bedroom with a blindfold and his hands tied. Due to Ayano still being a minor, Rita is unsure of what happened to her. He says he only remembers the police taking her away while his mother was hugging him. He moved to Australia after this and hasn't seen his kidnapper since, but he still cowers at the sound of her name. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommates that even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But all of that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police-patrolled park quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I went down a short side street in order to loop back down my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street, on my side, was the silhouette of a man dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still, until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off of him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back, and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me, but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments I felt relieved, until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked and I stood there for some time, staring at him, and then he started moving toward me again. He took giant, exaggerated tiptoed steps, as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone, except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point that I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray or cell phone or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen, as the smiling man crept toward me. And then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What the fuck do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. What the fuck? Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around, very slowly, and started dance-walking away. Just like that. Not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go, until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him got bigger and bigger. He was coming back my way. He was coming back my way, and this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off the side road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of my way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane. And that's a very, very scary thing to see. In the mid-80s, My mom was a cleaner in Australia. She would clean houses in suburban areas and would sometimes do houses in rural or wine regions. She would leave business cards at the local shops and got most of her business this way, and some through referrals and word of mouth. One day she got a call from a lady who sounded like she was around 60, asking Mom to clean her old farmhouse. She made a lot of odd demands, and Mom would usually meet clients before taking on new business. In this case, the lady did not want to meet my mom and said she would leave the keys under the front doormat. Mom agreed, mainly because the lady was quite obviously wealthy and was offering to pay Mom substantially more than she would reasonably expect. Mom went to the house on a Monday morning and said she already felt unnerved by the long driveway. The house was essentially in the middle of a very large and very empty property. She found the keys and started cleaning. About an hour into the clean, she hears the back door shut. Mom was told no one would be at the house, so she immediately felt unsafe. She stood frozen in the kitchen for what she said felt like 3 or 4 minutes, although she said it could have been much longer. There was no other car on the property. She wanted to leave immediately, but had 2 rooms left to do. Both were bedrooms. She said as time passed and she heard nothing else, she decided that perhaps it was nothing, or perhaps something had fallen and it wasn't the door after all. She walked up the hallway and stepped into the bedroom. All over the bed were black and white photos. As Mom got closer, she realized that the photos were all of her. Some were taken at our family home, and others were taken at other houses Mom would clean. Some through windows or over fences. She used the house phone to call the police and immediately drove to the end of the driveway. The lady ended up being investigated, but continued to claim that it was a break-in. After some time, the police stopped with their searching and we ended up moving to a new town 4 months later. I'm 22, and this incident happened a 1.5 years ago. I had just moved into my first apartment and was in the process of moving in. The door that led to my apartment locks itself automatically when closed. So, I was going to the entrance of the apartment complex to get my mail while talking on the phone with my friend. I returned to the apartment and sat on the bed while opening the mail while using the phone. I dropped the phone on the floor and it landed under the bed, so I had to lie on the floor and stretch for it. I saw something that caught my eye. There was someone under my bed. My eyes widened and I choked the urge to scream. The person under my bed was lying still with his back towards me and his head to his chest, so I couldn't see his face, and he didn't see me. Trying to be rational while so many thoughts rushed through my head, I picked up the phone, said, "Sorry, I dropped my phone. I'm just gonna take a shower and call you back." The bathroom is right by my bed, so I hastily walked in, quietly locked the door, turned the shower on, jumped out my window, and called the police. They told me to wait nearby, but to go across the street and see if anybody comes out the door of the apartment complex. This was during the summer and it was still light out. I placed myself across the street, hiding behind a car while watching my open bathroom window and the entry door. I called my friend and he came over just before the police. I gave them my keys and they went inside. Only moments later, 2 cops came out holding a thin and tired-looking man. His eyes looked crazy, but he didn't try to get away. The policeman that stood beside me and comforted me while the police searched through my house told me that the man stood outside my bathroom door with one of my kitchen knives, waiting for me to come out. This man had somehow crept in my entry door while I was getting my mail and hid under the bed. The man that was trying to hurt me turned out to be a homeless person and was placed in a mental hospital. When I was 21, me and my girlfriend were upstate in my family's vacation mobile home. It was during a snowstorm and we were sitting on the couch next to the heater, snuggling and watching late night TV. We were surrounded by absolutely nothing but forest in all directions, and all that was keeping us from the outside was a wooden door that had a broken lock. The last time my grandparents came up, my grandpa put a few cinder blocks by the door to use as a kind of barrier in the meantime, since the door opened inwards. Anyway, While we were watching TV, my girlfriend started shaking me, telling me she heard something outside. I assured her it was most likely a deer or a bear or something, but then 5 minutes later, my girlfriend looked at me again. I heard it too. I muted the TV so we could hear it better. It sounded like someone was messing around in the little lawnmower shed outside. My car was parked outside and all the lights were on inside. If there was anybody out there, they knew we were inside. My girlfriend was urging me to go outside and check it out, but I told her she must be crazy to think that I was going out there. The sound stopped and there was nothing but the sound of the storm outside now. After a few minutes, I felt it safe to shut the inside lights and open the blinds to take a quick look outside, but it was too dark to see anything. I turned on the porch light and I was able to see a good portion of the front yard outside. There were footprints in the snow. Not animal footprints. They were clearly shoe prints, and they were headed in the direction of the backyard. I went to open the curtains to the backyard window, and when I did, I felt the urge to scream, but my girlfriend did instead. Even though there were no lights in the backyard, we could see a man dressed in all black and wearing a vendetta mask facing the window. I immediately shut the blinds and told my girlfriend to go hide in the bedroom, while I grabbed my grandpa's hunting rifle out of the closet. I pushed the cinder blocks and a bunch of other heavy objects in front of the door as a barricade, shut all the blinds and lights, and went to hide with my girlfriend in the corner of the bedroom. There was a bang at the front door. He was trying to bust open the door. I don't even think he tried the knob, but it didn't matter either way. After a few futile bangs to the door, it seems the man finally gave up. I stayed up that whole night with the gun by my side while my girlfriend slept. We packed and left first thing in the morning, but the scary thing, there was a fresh set of footprints leading from the front yard window out into the woods. I haven't been up there since, but my grandparents have, and they said that there was no sign of a break-in or anything missing. I don't plan on ever going back up there. Back when my grandma was still alive, I would always walk down the block to her house every day to help with various chores. There was this one day that I walked over to her house the same time I always did and decided to let myself in. I was surprised she left the door unlocked. She was a very paranoid old lady and normally kept everything locked. I saw her bedroom door was opened upstairs and I heard her opening and closing drawers and cabinets. I walked upstairs calling Grandma, and as I was about 5 feet from the door, she slammed her bedroom door shut. I knocked, asking if everything was alright, and at that moment my cell phone began to ring. It was my grandma's phone number. I was so confused, but I picked up the phone anyway. My grandma was on the other end, telling me not to come over that day, as she was walking over to her seniors club. I felt my heart skip a beat as she told me this. I hung up the phone before she could say anything else, remaining silent. I knew exactly what was going on. I played dumb and said, "Grandma, I'll be downstairs," and made my way to my grandma's kitchen to grab a knife and dial 911. It remained silent in the bedroom after what happened. The police arrived and burst into the bedroom, and the loud and sudden bang of a gunshot caught me off guard. When the paramedics arrived and wheeled out the intruder, I recognized the man's face. It was my grandma's next-door neighbor. Apparently, he saw that my grandmother had left the house and broke in to look for jewelry. And when the police broke into the bedroom, they found the man hiding next to the door with a large knife in hand. If I had walked into that bedroom, I would have been as good as dead. The most haunting memory of my life. Me and my wife were getting home from dinner out, and as soon as we stepped out of the car, we noticed that our front door to our house was open. I told my wife to wait outside while I ran inside and ran straight up to our bedroom, where I hid the shotgun. I loaded the gun and scanned every single room upstairs. There was no sign of anybody. I made my way down to scanning the main floor, followed by the basement. There was no sign of anybody, and there was nothing missing or moved. I called the cops, and when they arrived, I told them what happened. and they began to investigate some rooms upstairs, followed by the basement. Nothing was turned up. They made a case of asking us if we were positive that we shut the door when we left. I myself was starting to have doubts, not completely sure if I had, but my wife remained confident that we had shut the door. The police seemed sure that if somebody had broken in, they didn't stick around long, as there didn't seem to be any signs of burglary. My wife was worried sick, crying that she wasn't comfortable being in the house. I comforted her the best I could, assuring her that whoever broke in the house left in a hurry. I finally fell asleep after hours of rolling around in the bed, but my sleep was immediately cut short by the disturbing scream of my wife. I looked at her, and she was staring intently in the direction of the closet. It hit me like a bullet just then. I had forgotten to check the second closet. I looked over and saw for the briefest second a man poking his head out of the closet before closing the closet door. Within 5 seconds, I had the shotgun loaded in hand and cocked it back to let the intruder know that I was armed. I screamed for him to come out, and just like that, the closet door opened, but instead of showing submission, he made a mad dash for the front door of the house. I could have shot him, but I didn't have it in me. He was never caught. He got away with it scot-free. I think having that gun saved us from a terrible fate. About a year ago, while still living under my parents' roof, I started experiencing some weird occurrences in my house, specifically my bedroom. While I was laying awake in my bed one late night, I heard a creaking sound coming from across the bedroom. My closet door had somehow been opened. When I got up to check it, I subconsciously checked for anybody inside my closet, even though I was 26 years old. Of course there was nobody inside, so I shut the door and went back to bed. Later that same night, I would hear rumbly, rattling noises coming from up above the ceiling. It sounded like something in the air ducts. It was a very strange sound. I really had no idea what to think about it, but as soon as it stopped, I kind of forgot about it quickly and fell asleep. In the morning, I did tell my dad about sounds in the attic the previous night, but annoyingly, he didn't seem too interested, or he just didn't take me very seriously. That night, I again lay in my bed awake, reflecting on life, when yet again, the slow creak of the closet door creeping open broke the silence. This time, I felt genuinely afraid. I knew the door was completely shut. It would take somebody twisting the doorknob for it to be able to push open. This time I took an extra careful look inside the closet for anybody, even though it wasn't a big closet and there really wasn't anywhere somebody could hide. I rationalized it as being a broken doorknob or something, and that same night, I again heard the rattling sounds coming from above the ceiling. It was exactly what happened the previous night. The next morning I convinced my dad to take a look at my closet door, but he quickly determined that the door was fine. When it was closed, he pulled on it, and it showed no signs of coming off the latch. Of course, he suggested that I was simply leaving the door unlatched, but I knew I wasn't. That night, I sat up, waiting for it to happen again, and right on cue, the closet door creaked open. I waited for the sounds above the ceiling, but there was just a long silence. I turned on my lamp and looked up to the air vents in my room, and I screamed at the top of my lungs. I could distinctly see 2 wide-open eyes peering through the vents at me. My parents barged into my room asking if I had gone insane. I explained everything, and they looked at each other like I had completely lost it. Not surprisingly, they dismissed it as a dream or the fact that I was too tired and was seeing things. They even began to lecture me about staying up too late. But to this day, I know I hadn't imagined it. It was too real. And the closet opening routinely? I know for a fact that wasn't in my imagination. I've never been a believer in the paranormal, but I still have absolutely no other explanation for those 3 nights. I live in the Poconos with my wife and kids. There's a small lake about a quarter-mile away from our backyard. I commonly take my kids down there to go swimming. Up until last week, that is. Now, I'm never letting them go down there again. I haven't told anyone about this in fear of sounding crazy. It was last Saturday. We went over to the lake and set up our chairs on the sand. It's like a little private beach in our own backyard. It's been amazing. Me and my wife sat in our beach chairs enjoying the sun while our kids were splashing around in the water. I always tell them not to go too deep. They're still young, 6 and 8. We sat there for a good 2 hours that day. Neither of us were in the mood to get wet. Eventually, my wife got tired and decided to walk back home. I agreed to stay with the kids a little while longer, as they were somehow still having so much fun playing in the sand and water. The sun was setting at this point, and I was getting tired. They were going a little too deep, so I called at them to come back closer to the shore. They couldn't hear me apparently, so I stood up and got closer. Before I could call them again, I noticed something in the water. It looked like a black, roundish object, and it was moving closer to my kids. I ran into the water closer to my kids, calling them to come out. When they got close enough, I dragged them out myself. When I turned back to the water, the object was gone. My kids were confused as hell. I didn't know what to tell them, so I just told them it was time to go home. We packed up and walked back to the house, but I wasn't happy when I got home. I was uncomfortable with what I just saw. That thing looked like no sea creature known to man. Dinner was waiting for us when we got home. I ate really slow, thinking about the object in the water and whether or not to tell my wife. My wife asked me what's wrong. She noticed that I was eating slow. I decided not to tell her right then. After dinner, I took a flashlight with me and walked back down to the lake. By then, it was already dark out. I got to the lake, but to be honest, I didn't even know what I was expecting to find. I shined the flashlight all around the surface of the water, searching for the black object. And just then, I heard a large splash come from somewhere in the lake. The kind of splash of something emerging out of the water. I thought it might be some kind of animal in the lake. I shined the light all over the place, searching for the source of the sound. And then I found it. And I realized I was dead wrong. There was a silhouette of a humanoid figure with long black hair covering its whole face. It just stood there, facing me, but not staring at me. Not that I could tell. I dropped the flashlight in horror and sprinted all the way back up to my house, slamming the door shut behind me. I haven't told anybody about this. What kills me is that lake is only a quarter-mile away from my house, and for all I know, that thing could be watching me through my window right now as I write this.
When I was 21 years old, I would be home alone at my parents' house a lot. We lived on a little pond which was directly in our backyard. On the other side of the pond was a little town park. Our neighbors were a bit spaced out. It was a pretty upscale, expensive block compared to the rest of the town, so the properties were big. I'm fully moved out now, but this was back when I was in college. My parents make a lot of money, and we have multiple homes, so often I was home alone. It was a random night in the summertime. I was off from school, so I can't remember if it was the weekend or a weekday, but odds are since I was home, it was a random weekday. I was in the back sunroom watching a show. That was my favorite room in the house in the summer because it was the most cozy and had the best breeze with all the windows open. I was right on the corner of the couch closest to the corner window when I heard splashing from outside, like in the pond. It could have been a goose or duck. Sometimes they'd fight in the water and make a bunch of splashing sounds, so at first I ignored it. But as it persisted, I decided to lower the volume on the TV and listen. I put my ear up to the window even, and I heard consistent splashing sounds, way too heavy to be from a duck or goose. It sounded like they were splashes from a person. I opened the door in the sunroom and stepped outside to the deck. I looked out to the pitch darkness of the backyard. I now heard a man's humming along with the splashes. Someone was definitely swimming in the water. They were trespassing. Each house on the pond owned a specific chunk of the pond. I stepped inside for a second to flick on the lights to the backyard deck. As I did this, just a bit of the pond was exposed, and the splashes and humming stopped. Whoever it was clearly saw me. I wondered if it was one of the neighbors going for a swim or something, which also just seemed weird because no one really swam in the pond ever. But honestly, whether it was or wasn't a neighbor, I wasn't going to confront whoever it was. I stepped back inside and turned off the lights, of course locking the door as well. I texted my brother who was away at college about it. He didn't answer right away. I was trying not to creep myself out over it, but watching TV after this was kind of hard. I couldn't focus on the show. I looked out the window, but all I could see outside was darkness. I still had the TV on in the background, not realizing how revealing the light from the TV would be outside. And then I thought I heard something on the deck. I hurried to find the remote and turn off the TV, and as the room went black and silent, it took me a few seconds to adjust and realize that there was the sound of someone's heavy breathing right outside one of the many windows in the room. I instantly laid down flat on the couch to try and hide myself, and after a short moment of silence, a deep voice from outside the window said, "I see you." My heart dropped into my stomach. I couldn't decide in the moment whether to speak or keep hiding, so I just blurted out, "Paul, is that you?" Paul was the name of one of our neighbors. I said this clinging on to the hope that maybe it was him, and he was just messing with me, but the man outside didn't respond to this. I just heard footsteps walking away. As the barefoot-sounding footsteps faded to silence, I still laid flat on the couch, too afraid to move. I laid for a few minutes, before the thought to go check that all the doors were locked came to mind. I exploded off the couch and ran straight for the front door. It was locked, as was the side entrance door. After a little while longer and texting my entire family about what was going on, my dad told me to turn the backyard lights on and check if anyone was still out there. He basically told me to be the man of the house and protect it. So I listened and checked the back deck through the window. It was clear. I brought a big knife outside with me onto the deck, and I looked down. There were wet footprints that had half dried by then, but I could tell that they were barefoot footprints. I followed the trail of footprints around to the side part of the deck, and what I saw was nightmare fuel. The top part of someone's head, namely their eyes and forehead, was peering just over the edge of the deck from the ground below, looking at me as if he heard me coming and was waiting. As we made eye contact, he turned away, and by now I was ready to call 911. I did so before even telling my parents. I locked myself inside, waiting for them, and when they came, I felt instantly better. They asked if our family had any enemies or people who don't like us, or if we have any problem neighbors. Questions like this. They did do a quick sweep of the property and then left. I decided to shut every window that night and run the air conditioning just for added safety. When I awoke the next morning, I was just delighted to see sunlight. I don't believe that man ever returned to our house, and we still don't know who it could have been. I have a dog who I take for a walk 3 times a day. First in the morning, then in the afternoon, and finally at night. I take him on the same route every time, which is through our driveway exit, which leads to a cul-de-sac parking lot for the condominium complex we live in. This will make sense soon as to why I'm telling you this. On the night walk, I always go somewhat late. I'm not sure why, but it's been a habit ever since I've had him, and it's never been a problem for us. Until one night, I begin our final walk of the day and go our usual route. I have a flashlight with me as there are no lights at the parking lot. and I'm listening to music with only one AirPod as I feel it would be for the best just in case I heard something unusual. And I did. As I'm approaching the parking lot, I was hearing something. A voice of some kind that was up ahead of me, but I was completely zoned out in my own world of music as it was happening. But then my mind finally caught up and I stopped. I took the AirPod out and stood still to listen, just to see if I was only hearing things. And then it happened again, a voice that spoke ahead of me, but I couldn't see anyone. So I did the stupid thing and continued to carefully walk forward because I thought it was all in my head. But something didn't feel right about it. I stopped again after a few feet right next to where all of the cars were parked, and I had my flashlight pointed everywhere in front of me. I stayed listening, and the creepiest thing that has ever happened to me yet was hearing a muffled voice of what sounded like a kid say the word help. My heart dropped so fast I couldn't move my legs. I frantically pointed my flashlight everywhere to see where it was coming from. I was sure it was coming from the cars, but I was completely thrown off by this. But there wasn't a kid in sight, or anyone nearby. It was just me and my dog, who didn't seem to notice anything as he was just sniffing some bushes nearby. And then I heard it again. The word help was spoken 3 more times, and it was coming from my left side where the cars were parked. It made me panic even more. I didn't know what to think of it, and I knew I wasn't imagining this when I saw my dog's ears perked up, and he was looking in the same direction I was facing after it happened. And that's when it hit me about how incredibly eerie all of this was. After hearing it multiple times, I realized the kid's voice didn't sound entirely like a kid. I don't know how to explain it, but it was like the mix of an adult and a child at the same time. And each time they called for help, not only was the voice always muffled, but it was spoken in a more generic statement as opposed to a cry for actual help every time. And I mean that literally. There was absolutely no change in the tone, inflection, sound, or anything of sorts. My dog and I ran straight home afterwards, and I tried to explain to my mom what happened. She was puzzled herself about what it could have been, and I suggested we call the cops on the off chance that there was actually someone in need of help, but she didn't think it was necessary. So many questions were conjuring up in my head. Why was the voice muffled? Was there someone in the car that I couldn't see? Or was it something darker waiting for me to move closer? I don't like to think too much about it, but whatever it was, it still makes me feel extremely disturbed to this day. This picture is where I had stopped and taken my AirPods out to listen, and I heard it up ahead on the left. This is where I had gotten closer and heard it on my left side. I'm aware that there's a condo complex on the right side, which some may think the noise was coming from, but it was in this direction facing the cars where my dog and I heard it, and you could see from this point of view that there's nothing to really indicate a noise coming from somewhere else. Also, at the time this happened, the cars that were parked were trucks and SUV types, so they were a lot larger and covering more space, thus making it harder to see from where I was standing. I never figured this out. What I'm about to tell you is the reason why my parents moved out of a house that was in the family for 3 generations. I've struggled with depression most of my life. It's hard for me to shake the feeling of being useless. I'm doing much better now, but when I was a kid, it was horrible. Because of that, I spent a lot of time alone in my room. My house was nestled in a very woodsy area. There were trees on 3 sides of it and a forest separating it from any neighbors. My room was pretty big for a bedroom. It was in the back corner of the house, so the windows on 2 walls faced the woods. It was honestly pretty scary for a kid my age. It didn't help that I was also scared of the dark. Things started happening when I was around 10 or so. I was in the 5th grade, and I was at the age where it wasn't acceptable to sleep in my parents' bed after a nightmare, but I was still accused of having an active imagination. The first thing I noticed was my nightlight. It had different color settings, so if I wanted, I could change the LED around. I liked keeping it on red, which is what I fell asleep to most nights. One night, though, I woke up randomly in the middle of the night, which was unusual for me. I was really tired and fell back asleep in under a minute, but before I did, I noticed that my nightlight was a different color than the red I always left on. I didn't think much of it until about a week later. One morning, I woke up and realized my nightlight was once again not set to red like it always was. I asked my parents why they were messing with my nightlight, but they were confused and told me they didn't know what I was talking about. I explained what had happened to them, and they told me that the thing had always been glitchy. They knew best, so I accepted that answer for a while. At least until one morning after waking up to see my nightlight unplugged completely. It was just sitting there on the floor. Once again, my parents dismissed my concern and told me my brain should be focused on school. My dad said I was getting too old for a nightlight anyway. A few days later, my nightlight was missing completely. It had seemingly evaporated out of existence. Now I knew my parents were lying to me. They probably thought I should have outgrown the nightlight by then and took matters into their own hands. This incident caused a massive fight between them and I, since both of us accused the other of hiding it, and neither of us was budging. I couldn't believe my parents would blatantly lie to me about something like this, but there was nothing I could do. After that, things went back to normal for a week. That didn't last long though. 3 nights in a row, I woke up randomly in the middle of the night. Each time, I had no idea what was waking me up. After it happened a 4th time in a row, I told my parents. They told me that I was going through puberty and that changes to my body are natural. The next time it happened, I stayed awake instead of falling back asleep. A few minutes after I woke up, I heard faint rustling noises from my closet. My parents didn't believe me. My dad even checked my closet, and there was nothing in there besides old toys and posters. The next 4 days remained the most traumatizing nights I've ever experienced in my life. I'd been woken up only to hear rustling in my closet. It was torture. I couldn't take it anymore. I begged my parents to believe me, and my dad got angry. He dragged me to my closet to prove there was nothing in there. He started throwing toys around my room, clearing the closet bit by bit, yelling at me the whole time. That is, until he pulled one of the posters off the wall. My mother and father stared in horror at the massive hole in the wall the posters had concealed. My mom started screaming, and my dad pulled out a flashlight. The hole was way too deep to see where it led, so my dad ran outside and began inspecting the outside of the house. There was a tiny hole in the dirt at the base of the house, and a little digging revealed that it was more than a divot. There was literally a passageway from the woods to my room. My mom and I were out of the house that night to my aunt's house. We moved out shortly after this. I stayed at my aunt's house until we did. I don't like thinking about this experience, but I'm gonna have to face it eventually. My parents also refused to talk about this incident, and I think it's partly because they feel some blame for not taking me seriously. It's chilling to think that there was a stranger in my room every night for over a month. I have no idea what they wanted, and will probably never know. If your kids come to you with something that sounds abnormal, believe them. My name is Leo. To be completely honest with you, I'm a little lost in life right now. I won't get into it too much, but all you need to know is that my family situation is horrible. And for the past 3 years, I've tried to stay as far away from home as possible. My close friends from high school have been changing in ways I don't like, and I feel like my hometown has nothing to offer me anymore. I'm about to be a senior in college, and to be completely honest, I have absolutely no idea what I'm going to do with my life after that. Enough with the sob story, though. I was in Berlin last year for whatever reason, probably searching for a sense of place or trying to find a direction in life. I remember the name of the bar I was in, Reduya. I was there alone, nothing I'm not used to. I was getting ready to leave when I felt around my pocket and realized my apartment keys were missing. Just my luck. I stumbled out of the bar and began walking toward my apartment anyway. The whole thing was locked up. There was no way I was getting in there, and it was way too late at night to get a replacement set. I'm not sure what most people would do in a situation like this, but my first thought was to start looking for a place to sleep. As if my luck wasn't bad enough, it started raining. Eventually, I decided to sleep under a nearby bridge. I didn't even know where I was, but I was out of the rain and safe, so I was happy. As I was drifting off, I began picking up on some faint voices coming from across the river. I sat back up and saw what looked like 5 men standing on the opposite side of the river along with a little boat that was tied off. They didn't seem to notice me. It took me less than a minute to realize what I was watching. There was an honest-to-God drug dealer or something going down right in front of me. My German isn't great, so I wasn't really able to make out what they were saying, but several briefcases and duffel bags were exchanging hands, so I filled in the blanks myself. I thought about finding a new spot, but I didn't want to draw attention to myself by moving. I figured I'd just wait for this to be over, then leave. All of a sudden, one of the men yelled something aggressively in German and pointed a gun at one of the other men. There was a brief moment of silence before the other guy put his hands up and began talking really quickly. It looked like he was being set up. The other men stripped the man at gunpoint of his clothing and started confiscating his belongings. I didn't feel safe there anymore and got up slowly to move. As I did, I heard one of the men shout what roughly translates to, "There's someone there." I started running, not even turning to look at them. They shouted more things at me, but the only words I was able to understand were, "Don't shoot." I ran until I threw up and nearly passed out due to drunken exhaustion. There was no way they'd be able to catch me, but they could have easily killed me. Sometimes I still think about how I could have lost my life that night if those men had decided to fire at me. Sometimes I feel like I'm fated to run forever. It was a normal Friday afternoon at my high school. I was walking down a hallway with my friend Emma as she talked about God knows what. I was just trying to get through the day because I honestly had a lot to deal with at home as well as at school, being that my foster parents weren't the nicest people to say the least. As we walked past the lunchroom, I suddenly had to use the bathroom. I asked Emma if she had to go. She said no and that she would wait outside for me. I went into the bathroom and immediately noticed no one else was in there. I thought to myself, that was weird, because out of the multiple bathrooms in the school, this one was always packed at any given time. I shrugged it off and went into a stall, and a few seconds after getting in the stall and sitting down, I heard the bathroom entrance door open and shut abruptly and someone entering the bathroom, but I didn't hear them move after entering. I didn't think anything of this. It wasn't really anything out of the ordinary. Maybe it was someone hiding from an admin. I went about my business. I stood up to button my jeans and read the writing on the bathroom wall. There was a bunch of random quotes and rants about teachers. Then I heard the door open again, and I assumed whoever was in here had left. I came out of the stall, and as I left the bathroom, Emma was looking at me with a weird face, almost like a "what the hell did I just see" face. I asked her what was up, and she asked me, "Who was that standing right behind you in the bathroom stall?" I got chills. I told her no one was in the stall with me and to stop fucking with me. She promised me she wasn't. She told me she actually came in seconds before I came out because she realized she did need to go. But then she saw someone else in the stall, standing with their shoes touching the back of mine. That's how close they were behind me in the stall. And she said she left immediately, not wanting to witness whatever was going on. I reiterated again I was the only one in the stall. However, I had heard someone come in, but I never heard them use the bathroom. And I had assumed they were hiding from an admin. That's when she told me no one went near the door until she came in seconds before I came out. I didn't believe in the paranormal, but this made my stomach sink. I found an admin and told her about it, and she pretty much tried to assure me that it didn't happen, that Emma was probably just messing with me. But Emma was never one to take things seriously or be serious in general, so when she looked me in the eyes with a serious face and told me word for word what she saw, I felt like it actually happened. And something really was in there with me, along with the fact that I heard the bathroom door open and close twice. I'm 18 now, and I haven't forgotten it since. This happened long ago when I was renting a small house in the town that I got my first real big girl job at. It was a small one-floor house with 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and just enough living space for myself and occasionally hosting some people. I had been living there for a few weeks already. All was fine. The landlord, who I'll just call Michelle, was really friendly and understanding. I think she rented to me because she didn't want a male renting out her house. I'll skip unnecessary details and get right to the point. Something very weird started happening a few weeks into living there. One regular work night, I got a knock at the door. I went to the other side and said, "Who is it?" and no one responded. I didn't open it. No one should be knocking on my door late at night. It was early the next morning. I had finished getting ready for work and was about to leave. I opened my front door and saw a big post-it note taped to the storm door. It said, "Hello, beautiful." I right away remembered the knocks on the door from last night. It was no doubt the same person, but the big question was, who could it be? I crumpled it out of disgust and threw it in the trash, hoping and assuming it would be a one-and-done thing. It was that night that I got another knock at the door. This time a little earlier, while I was cooking dinner. I went over to the door, this time not saying anything, just listening. There was no peephole or glass to look through to the other side. I had no way of seeing who was there without opening the door, and that wasn't going to happen, as the storm door didn't lock. But this was the second night in a row, and now I was realizing this was some kind of stalker situation. I called my mom and dad to ask for advice, and really, they didn't even know what to say. My dad, who was a retired police officer, said that if I called the cops, they wouldn't really be of any help unless they were catching the person in the act. My dad advised me to not go outside late at night for a while, don't answer the door, and if it persists, that he'd come to town and spend a few days with me. So that was the advice I followed. The next morning, the first thing I did was check the storm door for another note, and part of me died inside when I saw another note stuck to the glass. This one said, "I like to watch you." I took a picture of it with my phone and sent it to not only my family, but Michelle as well. I asked Michelle if she had any kinds of issues with certain men or any stalkers. She acted appalled and shocked when I sent her a picture of the note and told her about the knocks. She assured me that she didn't have any stalkers and that she was in a long-term relationship. Still, I wasn't entirely convinced. I left a note on the door after work that day, saying if you're looking for Michelle, she does not live here. She only rents this house out. If you continue to come here, I will be reporting this to the police. Doing this gave me a level of comfort, actually. I thought this would end things. That night, every waking minute was spent with anxiety, worrying about hearing knocks at the door again. To my relief, there were none tonight. I went to sleep in relative peace, thinking my note worked. The next morning, I opened the door and removed my note from the glass, but then realized it wasn't my note. It was a new note, and it said, "I'm not looking for Michelle, I'm looking for you." And then it said my name, followed with, "I like watching you," like it said in the previous note. I sent it to my dad right away. I felt seriously ill. My dad packed a bag and drove up first thing. He was at my house by the time I got home from work. And work that day was rough because I couldn't think of anything except for this horrific situation. I even wondered if someone in my office could have been doing this, like this creepy guy Fernando. My dad and I waited to call the police together until later in the night when we figured whoever was doing this may be hiding out there already. We wanted them to see the police presence. We spoke with an officer outside. My dad said it must have been a busy night since they only sent one. My dad being a retired police officer obviously didn't hurt in this whole situation. After the officer left with his report, my dad stayed out on the front stoop for hours, even after I went to sleep. Obviously the person didn't return that night, and I moved out once I was able to pack all my things. Michelle was completely understanding. Thankfully, whoever was stalking me at that house didn't follow me to my new place, likely eliminating the possibility that it was a coworker. So I will likely never know who it was. I'll be honest with you, I've probably spent more time chasing women than I'd like to admit. I've had to tone it down a lot since college, partly because of what I'm about to tell you. I went to school in California, and while I haven't been back in a while, when I was there, the culture was very open. And when I say open, I mean sexual. This honestly could have been true for other colleges in other states at the time, but I really wouldn't know. It was my sophomore year, and I had just finished pledging the fraternity Pike. About halfway through the semester, though, I was getting sick of only talking to sorority girls that seemed to know half the guys in every frat. It was honestly a little gross, and I started developing a fear that every girl I was interested in had been with several people I personally knew. I tried my luck and created a Tinder profile. It wasn't long before I matched with someone whose interests seemed to match mine. We started talking, and things were going well. After a few days, we made plans to meet up at a local college bar called Tap House on a Saturday night. This was actually my favorite bar in the area because it had pool tables and I had been clearing racks since I was 10 years old. I remember getting there a little early so I could secure a table and warm my muscles up a bit. An hour passed though, and I came to terms with the fact that I had probably been stood up. I was trying to decide whether I should salvage the night or just go home and play online chess when I got a notification. To my surprise, it was Yamel, the girl I was waiting on, telling me she had just arrived. I greeted her, and she apologized for being late. We got some drinks, played some pool, and got to know each other. She was Latina and a heavy drinker, so I got plastered just trying to keep up. At one point, she asked for my Instagram, which I gave to her. 10 seconds later, I found myself staring at a collection of explicit photos she had just sent me. I was confused, but in my drunken state, I wasn't going to complain. Before I could even respond, she told me, "Your turn," which I figured could only mean one thing. Honestly, if I hadn't been so drunk, I probably would have questioned why we were sending pictures to each other when we were literally 5 feet apart, but I didn't have the foresight. I complied with her request. We laughed about the whole thing, and that was that. A few hours later, things at the bar were starting to wind down. I was planning on inviting her to my place, but she beat me to it, asking if I could spend the night at hers. I agreed, and we left the bar. I couldn't even walk in a straight line. It was honestly embarrassing. We Ubered to her apartment, which was actually in Oakland, something I hadn't realized before. Honestly, red flags should have been going off in my brain the moment we crossed into Oakland. She unlocked the door of her apartment and stepped aside so I could go first. I took a few steps inside and heard the door shut behind me. It was pitch black in there. As I was turning around to ask her to flip some lights on, the room lit up. To my horror, I wasn't facing a harmless 5'2" girl anymore. Instead, 2 massive bald dudes with tank tops were standing in front of the door with their hands clasped. I turned around, and there was another white bald dude in front of me. I wish I could tell you more about the room I was in, but it was honestly difficult for me to recall small details of that night. I couldn't fight or flee, so I just froze. The guy in front of me began telling me my own name, birthday, and age. He then went on to say that the girl I had just gone out with was 17, meaning I had received and sent explicit pictures to a minor. He then suggested that I do what I was told, which I did. The 2 guys behind me confiscated my phone, wallet, and keys, all of which I gave up without a fight. I asked the guy in front of me what he wanted, and he basically told me that he was a major distributor of illicit substances in Northern California. He told me that I'd be outed as a pedophile if I didn't distribute his product to my fraternity and university. I wish I could remember more specifics. The 2 men behind me then gave me a piece of paper and told me to write down my address, followed by a list of names and numbers for as many students as I knew. I told them that I'd need my phone to complete the list, so one of them held it firmly in front of me and let me scroll through. All 3 of them were hovering over me now, knowing I was basically checkmated. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but the literal second I saw a chance, I ran. I was too drunk to think about the consequences of those pictures on my phone. I narrowly escaped out the door I had entered from and ran as fast as I possibly could. It's not like I was safe though. I was still smack dab in one of the most dangerous places in America. Eventually, I found a nice looking house and begged them to open up. I pleaded with them to let me use their phone and call 911, and then I told the police everything. But of course, I didn't remember the address of that girl's apartment. An officer picked me up and took down a report before asking me if I would be okay leading them back to that apartment. I was actually able to retrace the way I had run, and I waited in one of the squad cars as the police barged in. After a few minutes, an officer told me that the place was completely deserted and there were not any signs that people had even been there. In the following weeks, the police actually took my report seriously and launched a full-scale investigation. They concluded that it was probably gang-related, but were never able to arrest anyone. That was years ago. I bet this incident has been swept under the rug of Oakland's rampant crime and drug-related activity. In all honesty, what happened to me all those years ago is probably nowhere near the top of the list when it comes to that godforsaken place. I haven't used a dating app since. I've been smoking cigarettes every day for years. Before you judge me, let me just say that I recently started seeing a therapist for my nicotine addiction. Unfortunately, it hasn't helped much. The only thing worse than my nicotine addiction is my sleep schedule. I don't know what it is. I find myself staying up hours past midnight and rarely get out of bed before noon. While I'm trying to fix these parts of my life, they're extremely relevant to what I'm about to tell you. It began a few months ago. I was standing on my balcony, like I do most nights, smoking a cigarette. I live in a really secluded neighborhood. It's not like the houses around here are right next to each other. Despite this, I have a neighbor whose fence I can see over if I'm standing on my balcony. I'm not nosy or anything, but this particular night, I was looking into his yard. I had never met the guy, but I assumed he lived alone since there was only ever a navy blue BMW parked in his driveway. But not this night, though. There was a black van I'd never seen before sitting in front of his house. I didn't make anything of it, just noting the coincidence to myself. The next night, though, I made it a point to pay attention to his yard, and the same black van was parked there again. I didn't assume something sinister was going on. I was more intrigued than anything. The following morning, I went up to my balcony and looked into his yard. The van was gone. For the remainder of the week, I made a game out of observing the van at night, theorizing its purpose. I said I wasn't nosy, but I sure am obsessive. It's actually the main reason most of my friends drifted out of my life. I wasn't going to do more than observe, though. It wasn't my business or place to poke around further. That is, until one night, when I saw something that completely changed my perspective of the situation. I was up later than usual. It was maybe 5 in the morning. The van was there, as it had been the past several nights. I was smoking my last cigarette when my neighbor actually walked outside, something I hadn't seen yet. I watched as he made his way to the van, carrying what appeared to be a long black bag. It almost looked like a set of golf clubs, only much heavier. After opening the van's sliding door, he delicately placed the bag inside. He promptly got in the driver's seat and sped off. I was dumbfounded. I had absolutely no idea what he could have been carrying. I was exhausted though, so I figured I'd think about it more the next morning. The next day, I decided that I'd go out on my balcony a little earlier and wait for the van to arrive at his house. I brought my laptop up there so I could get some work done and wait. It was around 10 p.m. and the van wasn't in the driveway, but around 1 a.m. the van pulled in. I quickly shut my laptop and watched. Nothing happened for a good several minutes, like the van just sat there, engine running and all. After about 5 minutes, the driver door opened and there he was. I watched as he went around to the side of the van, then slid the door open and pulled out the same bag that he had put in the night before. He seemed to be struggling this time around, visibly trying not to crack under the weight of whatever was in there. After waddling a few slow steps, both he and the bag disappeared into his house. I didn't know what to think. I thought about waiting there until 5 a.m. again, but that would be far too taxing on my brain. Something was definitely wrong though, and I was determined to find out what. The next morning, I flipped a coin and ultimately decided to follow his van when he pulled out that night. After a pretty unproductive day, I went up to my balcony around 4 a.m. and waited, cigarette in hand. As soon as I saw movement in his driveway, I rushed downstairs, grabbed my keys, and got in my car. I turned my headlights off and waited for the van to turn onto the main road. Once it did, I began tailing it. After 20 minutes of driving, he pulled onto a dirt path that looked like it led into the woods. It did. I followed, and the woods actually started thinning up a bit. It seemed like this path had once been a main road or something. We drove for another few minutes before I realized what his destination was. There was a deserted gas station literally tucked away in some clearing in the woods, and right in front of it was the BMW I'd always seen parked in his driveway. I feared I was getting too close, so I turned my car around and parked across the street from the dirt road. I must have waited there an hour. His BMW finally pulled out of the clearing. Nervously, I started driving back up the path, not sure what I'd find. I pulled over on the side of the road and started walking towards the gas station. It was eerie. The front door was locked. I walked around to the side. That was locked as well. So was the back door. I needed to know what was inside. There was a row of windows that I tried to open, but none of them would budge. Against my better judgment, I picked up a rock and slammed it into one of the windows. It shattered pretty easily, but there must have been a security system in that place because alarm bells started blaring. I sprinted back to my car, the whole time wondering why an abandoned gas station would be rigged with an alarm system. As I sped out of there, I called 911 and gave them a vague description before hanging up. I got back to my house and ran inside. my heart still racing. The next morning, I woke up hoping the whole thing had blown over. Boy, was I wrong. I went up to my balcony to see like 8 police cars in my neighbor's driveway, lights flashing and everything. I watched as an officer escorted my neighbor out of his house in handcuffs. One by one, the police cars drove away and I was left to my imagination. I lit a cigarette and stood there, finally alone with my thoughts. I've asked the police for details on several occasions, but they would never answer my questions. I've even tried driving back up to that gas station, but the whole road had been blocked off. Maybe one day I'll work up the courage to walk through the woods and go looking for answers. I'm not somebody who grew up with any kind of sleep disorders, such as sleep paralysis or night terrors. I've always been a very heavy sleeper, so that's why when what I'm about to tell you started happening, it was a shock to me. We all have the occasional nightmare. I used to call nightmares a free, 3D immersive horror movie. To most, that will probably sound freakish, but in a weird way, I sometimes like the thrill of waking up after a nightmare. I was living with my one roommate, Patricia. I just called her Trish. We had very different schedules with work, so we didn't see each other much besides on the weekends. This happened in July. I remember because it was so hot out that I had the window AC unit on full blast every night, which also provided a white noise that helped me sleep better. It was the first night that I had the nightmare, a few days after my ex and I had broken up, and life wasn't exactly the best. I had a dream that I vaguely remember for the most part, but the part that I vividly remember is being in a room full of my family members sitting quietly around a dinner table, and standing across the table from me was what I could best describe to be a creature that looked like one of the aliens from the movie Signs, only with horns and claws. It looked like what you'd imagine a sleep paralysis demon to look like, only I was still fully asleep and dreaming. The next thing I knew, the thing was standing next to me, looking down at me. I started to run away in my dream until I was in my room, or I guess my brain's version of my room. That was the last of that dream I remember before waking up. My room was pitch black and the AC fan was on full blast. My heart was racing a bit from the dream, and I sat there thinking, wow, that was a creepy dream. I looked around the room naturally before laying back down and going to sleep. The following night, I woke up in the middle of the night to my bedroom door open, which I usually 99% of the time would leave shut unless I was drinking. My immediate thought was that it was Trish checking if I was home. I went up to go shut it and went back to sleep fairly quickly. I asked Trish if she came in my room the next day via text, and she told me she did not. So it was always possible I just took a midnight trip to the bathroom or kitchen that I didn't remember. It was the following night that I had another nightmare. That same demon creature from my previous dream appeared again in this one. This one was a lot more disturbing. Instead of being with my family, I was in a dark, square, empty room with the thing, and it kept getting closer to me. Oddly, I don't remember the thing actually moving its limbs to walk. I just remember that it kept getting closer and closer until it was on top of me. And then, like I couldn't even move, the thing took a claw to my thigh and scratched me, and I actually think I felt the pain in my dream. Then, the next thing I remember is waking up. I don't mean I woke up right after that. I mean I don't remember what happened after that in the dream. But it was dark in the room once again, AC on full blast. I felt a slight stinging feeling on my upper thigh. I felt it with my hand, and I actually felt like I felt something on the skin. I rushed to the bathroom and looked in the mirror, and I screamed out loud when I saw a gash in my thigh. I went to Trish's room and turned on the light, waking her up. She asked how the fuck I got that, and I screamed I don't know. We went to my room together and flipped off all the sheets and covers off the bed, looking for any kinds of bugs or spiders or any sharp object I could have laid down on, which, yes, I understand makes no sense, but what else were we to think? Trish then looked at me and said, wait, and put her finger to her lip. She turned off my AC unit, and for the first time in days, the room went quiet. It all became sickeningly clear in an instant, as we both heard a sound from under my bed. The kind of faint sound that you sense from another person just existing in the room. I'm impressed at both of our ability to not scream right on the spot as we both looked at the bed and then at each other, and then left the room and then the apartment. We knocked on the neighboring apartment door until he answered. We asked him for help. Someone was in our apartment. He was an older guy, so I don't think we expected him to go fight some stranger in our apartment. He let us use his phone to call 911. At some point while waiting for the police, we heard a door outside slam shut. It sounded like our door. None of us could look out the window in time to see who it was. When the police got there, we confirmed the intruder was gone. We did leave all the lights on in the apartment when we ran away though, and left in a rather sudden fashion, so the intruder definitely knew that we knew. And then came the reflection I had of my dreams, and what they actually meant. That demon in my dreams was supposed to be him, even in the first dream. And with my door being open that night, that means he or she may have been roaming around our apartment at night, possibly eating our food. And to think this person actually scratched my thigh so hard it left a mark, it's actually really disturbing to think about. This forever changed my outlook on dreams and nightmares. This happened when I was a little kid living in our old house in Suffolk County, Long Island. I'm gonna say I was about 6 or 7 years old. My older brother and I shared a bedroom on the top floor that used to be a separate apartment that my dad rented out to an old lady, but she moved out, and so the upstairs was mainly for my older brother and I at that point. The layout was as follows. At the top of the stairs, on the left was our bedroom, which used to be the old woman's living room. Straight ahead was the bathroom, and to the right was an extra kitchen and a small bedroom. We had a million toys in our room, as the room itself was huge, and it also had 2 parallel crawl-in closets on opposite sides of the room where we stored a million other toys and board games and stuff like that. There was one toy though, a race car with a bunch of buttons on it. The buttons would make the car's lights turn on momentarily and play varying sound effects such as honking, revving, and driving sounds, and a little rock song. It was a toy we had for like ever, because it was originally a gift from my brother when he was a little younger. It was a random night. My brother and I were both in bed, not yet asleep, when suddenly, like a jump scare from a scary movie, the loud revving sound of that car toy suddenly activated, along with the lights of the car in the middle of the room. I looked at the car and instantly got scared and accused my brother Luke of doing that to scare me. He was laughing hysterically, saying he didn't do it. I was completely terrified. The toy then stopped making noises and went quiet. I was extremely unsettled, as any little kid would be, but nevertheless, time marched on and I fell asleep. It wasn't for a while until something else happened. One night, when Luke and I were both in bed again, we both heard a weird thud in the room. Luke insisted on trying to creep me out, saying there was a ghost in the room or something, and I kept yelling at him to shut up or I'd get Mom. He kept laughing until we both noticed a light in the corner of the room. It was the toy car again. I got out from the bed and ran straight down the stairs yelling for my mom. I got to my parents' room and yelled there's something in our room. I'm sure I gave a little 7-year-old spiel about how there's a ghost in the room, hearing a thud and the lights on the toy car turning on. Luke entered the room, and my mom defaulted to telling him to knock it off if he's trying to scare me. He said how could he turn the lights of the car on from his bed? I slept in my parents' room that night because I was too scared to sleep upstairs. It was a long while after that night and nothing happened. Not until one night. Luke was not in the room. My guess is he was having a sleepover with one of his many friends. I was sleeping in the room by myself that night. I had long since tucked that car away in the small bedroom across the hall because it freaked me out. After my mom kissed me goodnight, I asked her to keep the door open since I was always scared when I was alone in the room. I rolled on my side and tried to go to sleep. But being that I was scared of being alone, I had a hard time getting tired that night. I felt wide awake. Then, there was a sound I can't explain that came from down the hall. I flipped over to face the door, and the toy car rolled into the room with its lights on. I let out a scream straight from the bottom of my stomach as I cried for my mom and pressed my body up against the wall. Moments later, my parents both came up the stairs into the room, noticing the car on the floor. I screamed that someone pushed the car into the room. My dad went to go check the other rooms, but said there was no one there. There weren't any places to hide up there besides the closets and under the beds, and my dad checked all of them. I don't know what my parents thought in that moment. On one hand, they probably thought the toy was malfunctioning or it's just my imagination, but on the other hand, I think they were also slightly freaked out. That toy car didn't have a feature to move on its own. My dad smashed the toy and threw it in the neighbor's trash to make me feel better. I slept in their room for a while until my dad forced me back upstairs eventually. This story is the reason why I believe in the paranormal and something after death.
I lived on a farm ranch with my grandparents. My parents kicked me out and I couldn't afford to rent an apartment, so they let me stay with them for a fraction of the cost. I slept in a bedroom on the first floor. The smell of old people was much more pungent in this room. It was littered with my grandma's religious relics. I had to deal with a giant painting of Jesus staring at me while I slept. Weird things didn't start actually happening until my second week of living there. I got home from my job working at a small corner store in town, and by then it was dark out. While unlocking the front door, I could hear footsteps out in the crops. I had to assume there was somebody trying to steal my grandpa's produce. I tiptoed closer to get a better look, making sure to stay away from any fallen leaves or anything that could make some noise. There was indeed somebody in the crops, but they were crawling on all fours, as if sneaking around. I could have confronted them, but that might have ended in trouble, so I went back inside to wake my grandpa. He went outside screaming like a madman with his rifle in hand. It was something along the lines of, "If I ever catch you here on my farm, I won't hesitate to blow your brains out." That seemed like more than enough to scare anyone off the property, but the next night, while asleep, things got stranger. I woke up and heard laughing outside my window. There was somebody standing there looking into the bedroom. He seemed to notice me as I sat up, and he walked away. I told my grandpa again. This time he was really pissed. He stomped to his closet, pulled out his rifle, and stomped over to the front door with me right behind him. This time when he opened the door, something immediately grabbed a hold of his leg, causing him to trip. I jumped onto the hostile, taking him down easily as he was already in a crouched position. My grandpa managed to get up, grabbing his gun and pointing it at the guy. I called the sheriff while Grandpa had the guy at gunpoint. I suddenly heard a scream while on the phone. It was my grandpa. I dropped the phone almost with tears in my eyes, fearing the worst had happened. I got to the stoop, and Grandpa was on the ground with his hand on his nose. He was bleeding. Someone else had come along, shoved him to the ground, and punched him in the nose before taking off. I wish I'd gone after those sickos with a gun. Who punches an elderly man in the face? In the end, the sheriff arrived for nothing, and my grandpa installed a camera system aimed towards the crops. Last month I got home late one night after hanging out with my sister, brother-in-law, and a few of their friends. I walked up to the stoop and saw my mom left a note on the door telling me to take out the garbage cans to the front. I made a point of being really quiet since mostly everyone was asleep by that time. When I got to the side of our house by the garbage cans, I could hear voices coming from our backyard. I took a peek over the top of the fence. There were two people standing by our patio table. I was freaked out, you could understand why. I had to run inside to tell my mom. My dad doesn't live with us, otherwise I would have gotten him. We only made it out her bedroom door when we noticed the two people from the backyard coming up the steps. I shoved my mom to the window, basically forcing her to jump out onto the tiny ledge below. I somehow got her to do so, and while hopping out myself, the two intruders entered the room. I only caught the briefest glimpse at them before hopping down to the ledge myself and then down to the grass. Me and my mom booked it to the neighbor's house. 2 weeks later, when we had just started to move past the incident, the sound of the phone ringing at 3 a.m. woke me. It kept ringing non-stop. It didn't go to voicemail. My mom got up after like the 10th ring. We looked at each other and let it be. The phone rang for another good 10 minutes straight until my mom finally yanked the phone cord out of the modem. We slept with it off that night. I was sure it had something to do with the break-in. Two weird things like that don't happen so close together without them being linked somehow. The next day, my mom got a text message on her phone. It said, "Why didn't you pick up?" This was only a week ago, and we're still shitting ourselves, worrying when the next incident might happen. A 14-year-old girl was asleep in her room on a school night when she apparently woke and remembered that she had homework due the next day that she didn't even start. She flicked her light on and began to work on it. The clock read exactly 1:15 a.m. Over the sound of pencil lead pushing onto the paper, there were faint noises coming from inside the walls. She stopped writing, and the sounds became more clear. It was as if something was being pushed from inside the walls. There was a storage space right next to her bed, with a big square door that comes off the wall to enter. The girl started screaming for her mom, and the noises suddenly became exaggerated, as if something were running in there. The door to the wall popped off, and a figure emerged. The girl's mother and father could hear the screams even through 3 closed doors. When the girl's father came to the room, he found a tall and overweight white man covering the girl's mouth with his hand. The fight was over in a matter of seconds, with a few good punches to the man's gut. 2 pairs of the girl's underwear were found in the man's pocket before he was arrested. Me and my wife were spending the night together in Cedar Beach. Unfortunately, the place closes at 9:30, and the place was miles from basically anywhere. So we were pretty much stuck with nothing to do at the beach at 9:30 at night. So we just took a walk through the wet sand until 10. For the first half of the walk, we didn't see a single person on the whole beach. Then we turned around to head back. About 20 feet into us walking back in the direction we came, we both picked up on something. There were more than 2 pairs of footprints in the sand. Ours were more washed away by then, but there were 2 other sets of footprints that weren't there before. These a little more recent. They seemed to set off up away from the wet sand where there would be no more footprints. You may think it was just another couple taking a late night stroll, but we hadn't seen anyone for the good mile or 2 we walked, so we were spooked. I used the flashlight app on my iPhone to scan around the nearby dunes. I even went as far as calling out asking if somebody was there. I told my wife to wait there while I headed over to the garbage pails. It seemed like the only place somebody could be hiding. It was clear. I shined the light further down, revealing a tunnel that probably led to a parking lot. I moved closer until I could actually see a little into the tunnel, and as soon as I could, I shut the light off. There were 2 things in there. I don't even know if I should call them humans, because from what I saw, they looked like hunched, naked creatures huddled in there. They had skin to match that of a medium dark-skinned Caucasian, but with much more flaky, wrinkly skin. I didn't mutter a word. I just stomped through the sand to my wife, pulling her with me as we ran back in the direction of the car. We made it back to the car in about 5 minutes, completely out of breath. We got in the car, and I finally explained what I saw to my wife. She looked at me like I was crazy, and she still does. But can you blame her? I'm sure you're not even taking this seriously. I reported my sighting to the proper authorities the following day, and have been coming back to the beach at night once a week to try and find the creatures once more. I work as a night janitor at the local high school. I would 95% of the time be the only one working the night shift because there wasn't really a need for more than one. I always start with the downstairs classrooms and work my way up to the upstairs classrooms. The cafeteria, gym, auditorium, nurse's office, those were all responsibilities of the morning and afternoon guys. So since I was always alone, I would commonly have a bunch of radios sitting around the hallways playing loud music, like I did this one night. The upstairs of the school was shaped like a U rather than an O, so to go around to the other side, there was only one way. I was mopping the floor in one of the social studies classrooms, when I noticed from all the way across the other side of the school, the lights to one of the classrooms turned on. I don't mean it was left on. I always shut the lights to every room I wasn't in. I mean the lights turned on. I stood there with chills running through my body. There was somebody walking over to the window. They stopped and stared straight over to me through the window. It was the most disturbing thing I had ever witnessed. I didn't know what to do. Confront them? Run away? Call the police? I got closer to the window. It was somebody who looked like they were in their 30s or 40s. He had black hair, and I could see a lot of facial hair. He raised his hand and began slowly waving at me. I pulled the blinds to the room shut and tried to catch my breath. Tried to sort out my options. When I lifted the blinds back up, the light from the room across the school was off. My heart went back into panic mode. He was surely on his way over to this classroom. Right then, the option to run seemed best, and so I did. I ran down the stairs and out the back door of the school, not giving a second damn about anything but me and my life. Security cameras revealed that sometime in the night, the man emerged from the basement of the school and began wandering around. Getting a closer look at his face, I could see just how disturbed it made me feel. He was not a pleasant-looking man. The creepiest thing, though, was the camera revealed him going back down into the basement and never coming out. He was never found down there, though, which makes me question if there's some hidden rooms or exits down there. Lately, doing this job has never been more terrifying. I used to work as a house cleaner when I was a 17-year-old guy trying to save up for college. The person I worked for the longest was a man named Jeffrey. I only spoke with him once when I met him, and a few times in between when he came home early from his job. That was it. I couldn't tell you if he seemed normal or not. He had a very serious rule, though, not to go into his basement. He even left a big sign on the door. The curiosity ate away at me, but I did my best not to sneak any peeks. So one day, while I was dusting the furniture in his room, I just got a little snoopy and started going through his drawers. Don't ask me why. In his bigger drawers, there was just a bunch of clothing. I started going through the smaller drawers and found things like cameras, batteries, photo albums, and various knickknacks. Same thing in the middle drawer, but in the bottom one, I found a small wooden box sitting perfectly in the corner. It needed a key to open it, but I had actually taken notice to a small key that had been hanging on his keyring in the kitchen. It looked like it could fit in this lock. When I tried it, surely enough, the key twisted in the socket and opened the lock. What I found was disturbing. There was a pile of black and white photos. The first ones were just pictures of the house, but then eventually, I was in every single photo, in every single room of the house, including the bathroom. The most disturbing picture was a colored one that stood out from the rest. It was taken from outside one of the windows, aimed to me when I was in the kitchen. I put the pictures back in the box, except for a select few to use as possible evidence for something that I feared might happen. I locked it back up and put it in the drawer. I left everything else in the bedroom as is. I was about to leave the house and never return when I passed the basement door. Now that I wasn't coming back, I figured I should check out the basement so that the curiosity wouldn't forever eat away at me. I stepped inside and flicked the lights on. The air down there smelled really bad, like rotting animals. There were weird posters on the walls, a lot of erotic ones. I was shocked to even see some with boys and girls that looked under 18. There were 2 doors leading to either rooms or closets. I didn't go into them, but the horrid smell was the worst by those 2 doors. I finally realized there was a buzzing sound whenever I moved. I noticed in the corner there was a ceiling camera pointing right at me, but after noticing it, it seemed to stop moving completely. That was my cue to get out of that house. I drove home to safety. Jeffrey tried calling me one time after this. I didn't pick up. He didn't leave a message. I'm glad I never gave him my address. I was getting off from work at Stop and Shop after doing the midnight shift. When me and the only other guy working at the time went to our cars, a black pickup truck pulled up next to us. There was a man and woman inside. They looked like dirty hillbilly rednecks. The guy had a mustache and a beard, with a cap on and a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. The woman had dirty-looking hair. Then again, her whole face looked dirty. When they stopped in front of us, blocking our path, the guy sitting inside asked us if we have any spare change for gas. My coworker dug through his pockets and dropped 2 quarters in the man's hand. I handed him $1 in hopes that he would just drive off. The guy looked at the money in his hand, then looked back at us. "I'm gonna need more than that," he said. We apologized and told him that that's all we had. "Bullshit," he said. I could see my coworker was getting just as nervous as I was. The woman in the passenger seat had a devilish-looking smile on her face. I walked around their car and speed-walked to my car, as did my coworker. I could see the man was spinning his pickup truck around. I turned the car on and immediately put it in drive and sped out of the parking lot. They seemed to be following me at first, but I eventually lost them. I pulled into a gas station and texted my coworker to make sure he was alright. He texted back saying he was fine. I wish it ended there, but a pair of headlights entered the gas station. It was the pickup truck. I got back in my car. He tried to block me by pulling up in front of me. The woman in the car pulled a gun and started to lower the window. I yanked it in reverse right out of the parking lot. My back window cracked as it was hit by a bullet. I somehow managed to lose them once more and make it home alive. I found 2 more bullet marks on my car. It's so scary to think how close I was to dying. And for what? Unfortunately, there are so many messed up people in this world. Me and Andrew, my half-sister's cousin, were 18 years old at the time. We decided to go exploring in the abandoned asylum in our town. It was way past dark, there were no cars on the road, so it was probably after midnight. Andrew drove. We both brought our video cameras in hopes to catch some interesting footage. YouTube was only 2 or 3 years old at the time, and exploring abandoned places was a pretty big thing for YouTube videos back then, so we thought it would be cool. We had to crawl under a hole in the fence that someone else had cut. We both brought along flashlights, of course. We got in through one of the broken windows. There were a few planks on the floor by the window that had once been planked up against the window to prevent anyone from entering. We began our search, both flashlights on, along with Andrew's camera, which had night vision capabilities. There was nothing but broken glass and graffiti everywhere. There were a few cracks and holes in the wood floors that led to blackness below. We didn't dare shine our lights down there. We both shared a few laughs, but I was creeped out as hell in there, and I knew he was too. The place was huge. We ended up in a small room with a dental chair and other equipment. It was strangely unsettling. The most unsettling room upstairs, however, was the bathroom. When we were in there, we heard a constant dripping sound coming from one of the stalls. When we tried to open it, it was locked. The opening at the bottom was far too small to crawl through, so we just left that room in a hurry, very creeped out. Behind one door, we found a stairway leading upstairs or downstairs. We wanted the video to be as scary as possible, so of course, like 2 teenage guys would, we went downstairs. There was a new set of hallways, much more creepy now that we were underground. There was a bulletin board on the wall with a bunch of old photos and news articles on it. Me and Andrew were checking that out when a metallic thud came from down the hall. We shined our lights over in that direction, just in time to see what we were sure was a forehead moving from the hallway into one of the rooms. Andrew started screaming as we ran back in the direction we came. Now, I would have just thought it was a homeless person or something, but as we were stomping up the stairs, a single flight below us, we could hear steps following us. At this point, I was screaming too. The feeling of being in the back was horrifying,
I felt that at any moment I would be grabbed from behind and dragged down the stairs, but we made it back to the main hall and down to the window that we entered from. We made it outside and could hear through the window the door to the stairway opening from down the hall. We got to Andrew's car as fast as we could and drove off, never looking back. We were a young couple that had just moved into a new house. We had a bedroom on the first floor. The house had an upstairs, a middle floor, and a den, no basement. At night, we started hearing strange noises coming from below us. I checked under the bed, nothing was there. The sound seemed to be coming from beneath the floor, but the house didn't have a basement, so it didn't make sense. We started to notice things were different in the morning, like certain doors were opened that we were sure had been shut the previous night. My wife's closet door always seemed to be open. We made sure to shut all the windows one night just to make sure it wasn't some kind of draft. The doors were all open the next morning. We had decided that it had gone far enough. The next night, we both stayed up, listening and waiting. The noises coming from below were louder than ever. Sounds like things being pushed around, moaning. I headed down to the den and put my ear against the wall, listening for where the sound may be coming from. It was coming from inside the wall I was up against, but a little lower down, below the den. I went back to my wife. I told her we had to stay up for as long as possible and see what happens. We stayed up until around 2. My wife started to drift off, and I guess I had shortly after. I woke to my wife shaking me, silently crying to herself. She pointed at her closet, which had been opened. There was some kind of hidden door propped open in her closet. It led down into the floor. I hopped out of bed and shined a light down there. It was a ladder, leading far down to some hidden room. I had my wife lock the door and call the police while I took my machete with me down into the secret room. When I got to the bottom, I found a light switch. The room had a table and chair, a small cot in the corner, and a bunch of toys scattered across the room. A scream came from upstairs. It was my wife. Somebody was trying to break down the door. I climbed up the ladder the best I could while holding the machete. By the time I got up there, they had already kicked in part of the door. They stuck their head through a hole in the door and looked at me. It was a dirty-looking man. I saw craze in his red eyes. He must have seen my machete because he ran straight out the front door. I don't know what the room is for, maybe some kind of old bomb shelter or something. But I don't know who the hell that man was, how the hell he got down there, and how long he's been down there. I was 27 years old, moving out to live with my girlfriend in an apartment. It wasn't the fanciest place ever, as we weren't the wealthiest couple ever, but it was fine for us. The first night in, we already hated the neighbor. There was yelling and thumping going on all night. It was like they didn't sleep all night. My girlfriend wanted me to go over. I told her if it continued the next night, I would go over. We didn't hear anything of them throughout the day while setting up furniture, but when night came and we were trying to get some sleep, the freakish yelling and banging resumed, sometimes even bangs on the wall. I decided to draw the line and confront them. I knocked on the door, and a middle-aged albino woman answered the door. Her voice was raspy as if she had been smoking cigarettes for the past 40 years. I politely asked her to quiet down. She told me to back off and mind my own business before slamming the door in my face. The noises and yelling only got louder after this. My wife said we should report them. I went to the front desk the following day, bringing up the couple that lives in that apartment. The doorman looked puzzled. He told me that only a woman named Kathy lived there. Her husband passed away 5 years ago. She was written down as only being one person in that room, so she was breaking a rule of the apartment building. The doorman went to go check out the room. The woman let him search the apartment. He came back to tell me that she was all alone in there, which seemed so odd. He did, however, ask her to keep it down. I thanked him and went back to the room. It seemed it had worked, as there weren't any sounds that night. I woke to see somebody standing by our bed. "Anna?" I whispered. My wife turned next to me. She was in the bed. The familiar raspy voice at the end of the bed said we shouldn't have reported her. I screamed and fumbled for the light switch. My wife started screaming even louder. By the time I turned on the lamp, she was gone. I slipped on my shoes and ran out into the halls in my robe looking for her. Her apartment door was open, but she wasn't in there. Where could she have gone so fast? Nothing was heard of Kathy for a whole week, before one night there were 4 loud knocks on our walls. Not thumps like the previous noises. These were actual knocks, meant to get our attention. We moved out a day later.
There was a brief period of time that I lived alone. When I freshly moved out of my parents' house and before I met my girlfriend and she moved in, I lived in a small 1-bedroom apartment in the downstairs of someone else's house. I spent a lot of time alone during this period of my life, besides when I was at school or work, and so I spent a lot of my time watching movies. Specifically, I liked watching scary movies pretty often. Even as an at the time 21-year-old guy, I still would be a little spooked trying to sleep after watching a scary movie, especially living alone in that apartment, and every time I did, I would look around the room. At a few points, I would even turn the bedside lamp on just to check around the room. The tenant upstairs wasn't home that night, as his car wasn't in the driveway, so the sounds I was hearing couldn't have been footsteps upstairs or anything like that. My nerves were really starting to set in at one point because I just kept hearing noises, and to be honest, I couldn't tell from where in the house they were coming from. I got up to head over to the door of the bedroom and opened it. Outside of my bedroom was a very narrow hallway, which had a door to the bathroom, and then at the end of the hallway opened up to the living room. At the end of this hallway though, like a scene right out of the movie I had watched not even an hour earlier, there was someone standing at the far end of the hallway right by the kitchen. The moonlight from outside coming into the bedroom windows and the windows in the living room was enough to see her, this woman looking right back at me. She started to walk backwards while still facing me. I didn't care though, I still screamed and backed into my room before slamming the door shut and locking it. She didn't come running over and pounding on the door or anything like that. Instead, I heard running up the half flight of stairs to the exit of my apartment and then the door slammed shut. I was frozen in shock for at least 10 minutes before I felt okay to take my phone and leave the bedroom to check the apartment. It didn't take long, it was a small apartment with not many hiding places. It was empty. I rushed to lock the door, wondering who that could have been and how they got in. I didn't call the police, I couldn't tell you why, but the next day I called the landlord and told him about it. He made a phone call to the upstairs tenant, and what I learned shocked me. The woman that broke into my apartment was an ex-lover of the man who lived upstairs, a crazy one at that, and after finding his address somehow, she broke into the wrong part of the house, my apartment. The upstairs tenant came down to my door and apologized to me that following day, but I never got much detail from him or the landlord. I still wonder what that woman was planning on doing to him. I'm not a fan of my dad's girlfriend at all, not from the start. Her name is Kathy. My dad has been widowed since 2019 when our mom died, and I know he's gotten lonely and he's pretty much ready to settle with anybody now, even Kathy, and against my warnings, he doesn't listen. I've been seeing her do some sketchy things around the house, and it's really starting to freak me out now. I'll start from the beginning. I have 2 siblings, my 10-year-old brother Jake and my 2-year-old brother Scotty. From the day he introduced her to us, I didn't like something about her smile. It was just unsettlingly wide and exaggerated. Pretty soon he'd start bringing her around a lot more, and I just never loved her honestly. But at first it was only because I felt something was off about her personality. Then things started happening. She's been staying with us for a while now, and a few weeks ago, I caught her in my dad's closet while he wasn't home. My dad's safe is in his closet, along with where he hides the combination and some other valuables. When she saw me at the doorway, she smiled and said, "Hey, what's up, sweetie," to me, with her annoying, creepy smile. I didn't say anything other than nothing. Then she shut his closet door, and I walked away to my room. I told my dad about it, but he didn't seem concerned. A few days after that, while my dad was at work again, I just got back from school, and I was walking upstairs to my room. And as I saw Kathy leave my little brother Jake's room and shut the door behind her. I asked her what she was doing in his room. She smiled and said, "I was just opening the window, it's hot in the house." I didn't answer and walked up to my room. When I heard her go downstairs eventually, I snuck to Jake's room to check if she actually had opened the window, and both windows were shut. Something was up with this lady, and I knew it, and I still know it. I told my dad again, and in response, he asked me to just please be patient with the situation, and that he knows I don't care for Kathy. I didn't bother telling Jake. Fast forward to 2 days ago. Jake, my dad, and I were all not home, and Kathy was babysitting Scotty. I came home unannounced, but I wanted to be secretive about it, because I wanted to see if I could catch her doing anything again. I snuck into the house and went to my room quietly. Eventually, from the kitchen downstairs, I started to hear Scotty crying. Not regular crying, like a very distressed kind of crying, and I heard Kathy screaming at the top of her lungs to shut the F up. It was the first time I heard her raise her voice, and I believe it was the first time I was hearing her true colors come out. I ran downstairs to yell at her to leave my brother alone. She was startled and shocked that I was home, and for the first time, she didn't give me her creepy smile. She looked at me blankly and went downstairs and shut the door. I called my dad and told him right away, and that night, my dad had a conversation with her about it. I don't know how it went, but I assume not good, because that night, I woke up in the middle of the night to something, and looked up into my room. There was someone in my room, and they quickly left the room and shut the door behind them. I got out of bed and opened my door, and as I got into the hall, I saw and heard my dad's bedroom door close. I went over to my dad's room and opened the door, and both Kathy and my dad were laying in the bed. I woke my dad up furiously and told him Kathy was just in my room. She denied the whole thing, saying she was in bed. I don't know if my dad believed me or not, but he told me to go back to my room and he'd talk with Kathy. I obeyed, and I heard them whispering as I shut the door. I went back to bed, and I was scared. I'm still scared. I want her out of the house and out of our lives. I think she's dangerous. Why was she in my room? It's freaking me out. I worry for my family's well-being, and I don't know what we can do. This one goes back a few years ago to when I was 30 years old. I was at my condo in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. My condo, which I still own, is on the second floor of a decently nice building that I won't name for privacy reasons. Whenever I go down there, it's in the colder months up north, and I'm a complete beach bum when I go down there. Luckily for me, I work remotely from my job through my laptop and phone, so I've been able to retreat down there whenever I'd like. Fort Lauderdale is for the most part a pretty clean and safe city, and the specific location my building is in is no exception. That is, usually. It was the middle of January. It was late at night, past 10 o'clock. I was out on my balcony with my feet over the railing, on my laptop, when all of a sudden I heard from down below on the ground someone yelling something. They were yelling, "Yo," and "Hey you." At first I didn't move, taking the assumption that whoever it was talking to someone else. They couldn't possibly be calling up to me. But they followed with, "Hey you up there." And my heart skipped a beat, because now I knew they were talking to me, and my main question was, why? I set my laptop down on the chair and looked over the railing down to the ground below. There was a guy in front of a car in the parking lot, looking up at me, and he said, "Yeah, you." I asked, "What's up?" He told me to come down there so he could show me something cool. I took a better look at this guy, some guy with a backwards hat and tank top on. I assumed he was just some punky kid messing with me, so I ignored him and sat back down. When I did that, I heard him laughing as he said, "I'm gonna come up there and skin you alive, you prick." I stood up again and looked at him. He had this unsettling and sinister smile on his face. I realized he looked older than I initially thought. He wasn't some kid. I literally opened my mouth to shout something back at him, but for some reason, I didn't bother. I grabbed my laptop and went inside and shut the sliding door. I expected him to yell up a couple things afterwards, but I didn't hear him do so. As uncomfortable as that made me, I felt much safer being inside. I chalked it up to just the occasional coked-up Florida lunatic on the streets. But things became next level when the silence of the room was broken by pounding on my condo door. accompanied with a voice yelling obscenities and threats at me. It was the guy again. The bangs were so loud I was genuinely concerned he was going to break the door down. All I could do was yell, "I'm calling the police." That didn't faze him. His bangs turned to these carving and stabbing noises. It probably all lasted for about a minute or two, but felt like a century until he gave one more loud angry bang, screamed one more obscenity at me, then left. I knew because I checked through the peephole. I called the police after the ordeal just to show them and report it to them. On the other side of the door, there were several stab marks in it, confirming I did hear him stabbing at it and confirming this man had a knife. I pray nobody was harmed that night. I doubt he knew me. I think he was just a really drugged out crazy person looking to hurt someone. I once spent a night in jail. I know everyone says it, but I didn't do shit. I was attacked by a bouncer at a nightclub in my hometown because some girl who I had history with was there, and she had the nerve to lie to a bouncer and tell him I was touching her and her friends inappropriately, when I never even said a word to them. The bouncer came and put his hands on me and started pushing me out of the club, and honestly I pushed back in my drunken state. And of course cops were outside the bar, and between a drunk guy and a club bouncer, who are they going to side with? Well, I end up handcuffed in the back of a cop car and I'm escorted to jail, where I spent the night. All that was in this cell was one wooden bar for sitting on, and this other guy besides me. He asked what I'm in for, and I told him for bullshit. I took one look at the guy and I knew I didn't belong here. He had tattoos on his face, he was missing a front tooth, and he just had this face that said, "Don't mess with me or I'll cap you." I didn't want to rub him the wrong way, so I just tried talking with him if he talked to me. At one point, I did open up to him a bit just because of my anger at the situation and I needed to vent. During this time, I told him some delicate info, like where I was from, which is definitely the nicer side of town. I told him how I had people over that night since my parents were away, and we all pre-gamed and went to the club. I basically told him the rundown of the whole night. Since I was drunk, I wanted to just try and sleep, but he'd keep talking to me and it was getting annoying. Eventually, I think he caught on and shut up. The next morning, we had to go to court because, yes, sadly I was charged with assault and trespassing. 2 bogus charges. My cellmate had to go too. I saw the judge before him though. He was one of the other offenders in the back of the court listening to my charges. I was released with a future court date set. A complete nightmare. But that night, when I was at home, and all the windows were open so I heard everything from outside, I was hearing footsteps circling the house. Multiple sets of footsteps. I started to shut all my windows one by one on the first floor. Then I got to the backyard door, which is a sliding glass door looking out to the deck. I curiously flicked on the deck light, and immediately, 2 dudes ran out from the light into the darkness. I recognized one of them to be my cellmate. I closed the blind to the door and continued closing the rest of the windows. I couldn't believe he found me, but he was obviously there to rob our house blind after I told him how my parents were away. He must have seen dollar signs when I told him the side of town I was in. And he probably heard my name called in the courtroom, and one quick Google search of my simple name turned up my address. The 2 dudes took off, I believe, because I didn't hear from them the rest of the night. I never told my parents I was arrested, and because of that, I never told them about how my cellmate almost came and robbed our house. This is something that just happened to me, and I don't know how to feel about it other than freaked out. I'm not a spiritual person at all. I've been on and off seeing this guy named Spencer. I met him through a coworker one night when we were out together at a bar, and we hit it off. I finally introduced him to my family, and while my parents were indifferent about him, my grandparents didn't really care for him, my grandma especially. They both said they saw something bad in him, that he doesn't seem like a good guy. My grandma mostly. This wasn't after one-time meeting though. This was after I brought him around multiple times and everyone could get a good idea about him. And honestly, I started to see what they meant because Spencer and I would get into constant arguments and he would lose his temper fairly easy on me. For this, we'd be on and off constantly. There was one night that I felt like he was about to raise his hands to me, but he held back and then calmed down. This was when I said, "I'm done," and dropped him. Or so I thought I was going to. My grandma was especially happy and said I could do much better. Then she went on about how I should go find a nice Italian boy from a nice family like she always did. Anyway, not long after this, my grandma died of a heart attack. During my grieving, I hung a picture of my grandma up on my wall in my room to commemorate her. This was only a month ago. I had been having a horrible month, and out of weakness, when Spencer reached out to me 2 weeks ago, I answered, and we saw each other. We had been seeing each other every night these past 2 weeks, and I really thought he had changed because we hadn't argued a single time, and I just felt safe around him. Well, only a few days ago, Spencer and I agreed to be official boyfriend and girlfriend, and that night, I woke up to a crash in my room. I panicked and flicked on the lamp, and it took me a moment to notice the picture of my grandma wasn't on the wall anymore. I got up and saw the frame had fallen to the floor and cracked. The picture frame I hung of my grandma had fallen and cracked on the night I agreed to date Spencer. I held the frame in my hand, my heart in my throat, my whole body shaking. I called Spencer the next day and told him I think we should go our separate ways for a while, as my head isn't in the right place. And he blew up on the phone in anger, and that phone call proved my grandma was right about him. But that picture frame falling and breaking, what could have caused it? There was no draft in the room. Even as I imagined that it was somehow a sign for my grandma, do you realize how freaking scary that is? I took my Jeep on a road trip to Colorado to do some off-roading in the wilderness. I was doing a bunch of trails in the Red Feather Lakes, and I was ending the night off on the Dead Man's Road Trail. It was a somewhat challenging trail, but the scenery was unbeatable. I packed a sleeping bag and planned on sleeping in the back of my Jeep with the back seats folded down. I pulled somewhere off the immediate trail, just off the slight chance some other night drivers would pass by. But that was very unlikely. I guess people can call me a weirdo for enjoying off-roading on my own and camping alone, but I've always liked doing things solo. I use the word camping because I do consider this to just be luxury camping. Instead of being in a tent, I'm in the back of my Jeep in the middle of the woods. I ate some of the protein bars and other snacks I brought as my little dinner. Then I set up my sleeping bag in the back. In case you're wondering if I was doing this in the dark, I had the LED light bar on my Jeep on, which basically lit up the entire surrounding area pretty nicely. So I finally crawl into the sleeping bag, and I'd be lying if I said it's comfortable sleeping back there. It's the price to pay for off-roading in the sunrise for me. I had the windows all closed to avoid bugs getting in, but I still heard everything outside. And then it happened. I heard a voice from out in the woods, followed by a short, loud laughter. As deep into the trail I was, there's no way someone was just walking around out there. Not in this total darkness. I looked out the windows expecting to see headlights or taillights somewhere, but nope. Then I heard the voice again, much clearer. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman at first. I was shaking now though. Someone was out there, that much was clear. Though I was hearing a voice, I didn't know what was being said just yet. And then I laid there, waiting for it again, scared to death. For a while, just crickets. Then, much closer now, I heard in a clear voice, belonging to either a woman or a young boy, "Hello, I see you there." Now I was ready to throw up. I wanted to move to the driver's seat and drive, but I was too scared to move. I felt like if I just stayed laying down, that whoever was out there wouldn't see me. I know that makes no sense, but hiding and not moving was me clinging on to the hope that this wasn't actually happening. Then, there was one loud bang on my rear windshield, and I jumped up and practically dove over the 2 front seats into the driver's seat. And I started the car and drove as quickly as I could manage down the trail, scared they were running after me because I could only go so fast on this rocky terrain. I was scared to look in the rearview mirror, but when I did, I didn't see anyone through the red glow of my taillights. It was a nightmare. I was tired, but drove the rest of the trail until I was back on pavement. Then I drove for miles until I reached a motel. Some people have asked me, what if it was someone stranded who needed help? And I say no way. No one's out there that late in the pitch black, laughing without a flashlight that deep on some trail. And they wouldn't bang on my windshield just once like that if they weren't trying to scare me. People are messed up. Always watch your back and be woke to your surroundings. This is one of the few unexplainable events I've experienced in my life. I was home upstairs in my room, writing my paper for my history class. As far as I knew, I was home alone, but apparently I was mistaken, because my mom's voice called out from downstairs, yelling my name. I called back, "What?" She didn't answer, So, slightly annoyed because I didn't want to be interrupted from my train of thought on my paper, I reluctantly got up to go downstairs and see what she wanted. When I got downstairs, I looked around for my mom, but she wasn't anywhere in sight, so I yelled out, "Mom?" And she yelled back my name in response. Her voice came from down in the basement, so I went to the basement door, but strangely the lights were off. I called down the stairs, "Mom?" again, and she called back. I yelled out, "What are you doing down there with the lights off?" She didn't respond. I flicked on the light and went down the stairs. I heard my mom call my name again as I was near to the bottom of the steps. It was getting weird. Each time she called my name, it sounded exactly the same, like there was zero difference in inflection every single time she said my name. I yelled out "Mom" again, and she once again yelled back my name. She was nowhere to be seen in the basement, but then I noticed the little crawl space closet door was open. I call it that because it's a weird closet that you have to kind of crawl into, but it takes up a large chunk of the basement. That was the only place left in the basement that my mom could be. So I said "Mom" one final time. No answer this time. I went closer to the closet door and got on my knees just to try and look in. It was pitch black inside, and I was starting to get freaked out. I said, "Mom, are you messing with me?" There was no response at all, just the quiet buzzing sound from the basement light. I got back up, and for some reason decided to sprint back upstairs, slamming and locking the basement door behind me. I didn't know what I had just witnessed and heard, but I went to grab the house phone and call my mom's cell number. It rang a few times until my mom picked up, and I learned that she was out grocery shopping. I told her, but she didn't believe my story, of course. She thought I was messing with her. It took half an hour of begging her to believe me that she finally went along with it, and when she and my dad were both home, we all went down to the basement together. The closet door was still open. My dad went inside, but there was no one in there. This still remains to be the most haunting, unexplainable experience of my life. I was only about 9 years old when this happened. I was sleeping over my grandma's house for the weekend, which I often did when I was little. It was a stormy day out, and my grandma was out at the nearby grocery store getting ingredients for dinner. I was in the living room watching SpongeBob when the phone rang. There was obviously zero reason for me to answer the phone, but you know, I was a little kid with a little kid brain. There's no explaining any decisions made. I went to the kitchen and picked up the phone, and after my little kid voice said hello into the phone, the man's voice on the other end said, "Can I speak to the adult in the house?" I said, "She's not home," and the voice responded, "So you're all alone right now?" I remember I paused for a second, then said, "Yeah." Even at my age, I knew after he asked that it probably wasn't a good idea to have picked up the phone. The person on the other end then asked if the current address he had on file was correct, but I didn't answer that. I hung up the phone, and now I was nervous. I was worried I might have just gotten my grandma in trouble. Nonetheless, I went back to watching SpongeBob. 20 minutes later or so, there was a frantic knocking at the door. I muted the TV and listened. Along with the knocking, someone on the other end cried out, "Please help." It was a man. I snuck over to the edge of the wall where the opening for the front door was to take a peek and see if I saw anyone standing on the other side of the door through the glass at the top of the door. That was a mistake, because I did, and they saw me too. The man on the other side of the door immediately said, "Little boy, please open the door, I'm hurt bad." I ran to the corner of the room by the window and closed the blinds so I could hide behind the couch. I was so scared. There were no cell phones back then. I couldn't call my grandma. The man kept pounding on the door, his cries for help turning more annoyed sounding, and his knocks got louder and more frequent. Then the pounds on the door stopped, and he started knocking on the window right next to me. The creep started saying things like, "I'm not gonna hurt you," and "Please, I'm bleeding bad." I started to cry in the corner, still hiding behind the couch. The pounding stopped finally, and after a minute, I ran to my grandma's room and locked the door. I laid in her bed under the covers with only my head sticking out. The rain hitting the windowsill and the occasional distant thunder was weirdly calming, at least for a little bit. The man on the other side appeared at one of the windows and started trying to lift it open. Thank God all the windows were locked. Now I hid under the covers completely, and I don't think he saw me in there. This was the last time I saw or heard that man. 20 minutes later, I heard my grandma come in through the front door. I ran into her arms, crying and apologizing, and told her everything. She of course called the police, and when the officers needed me to give whatever details I could, my grandma called me into the room and I answered their questions. Then she sent me back off to the guest bedroom to watch TV. Unfortunately, that man was never caught, for this at least. My grandma never told my parents, and she told me not to tell them either, but she also never left me alone again anytime I slept over after that, which wasn't many times. Long story short, I was one unlocked door away from undoubtedly being kidnapped. I'm a father of 2 kids. They're 15 and 10. My wife was out of the house at the time of this happening. I was in my room taking a nap in the middle of the day. My older son is always in and out all day, every day with his friends. So when I heard the front door constantly opening and closing, it didn't concern me. But eventually, when I heard the storm door slam shut for a 4th time, I started to get annoyed and whistled at him to quiet down. I started hearing other loud noises from across the hallway, in the direction of my younger son Keith's room. I imagined he was playing with his wrestling toys or something. Regardless, even with my door shut, the noise got to be too much. It was just like a constant thumping sound. Like, what could Keith possibly be doing? When I went across the hall to his room, the noise became more clear, and it was this literal thumping on the wall sound. I went into his room. The door was already opened. I said Keith's name angrily, but I didn't see my son. I saw some grown man facing the wall, banging his head into the wall. There was blood on the wall from his constant banging. The man gave me a side glance without turning his whole head. I managed to tackle the man to the floor, and that's when Keith emerged from under his sheets where he was hiding. The man didn't fight back. He started yelling this psychotic mumbo-jumbo, proving his lacking sanity. I told Keith to go get the house phone while I held the man down. After calling the police, I was in that same position for at least 5 minutes before they arrived. The man just kept smiling and laughing and saying things that made no sense the entire time. The man was ill or on some serious drugs, or both. I didn't press charges, and I'm sure he was taken somewhere to get the help he clearly needed and to get him off the streets. I've had many night terrors in my life, and I've struggled with many sleeping disorders. Hell, I can't even count how many times I've experienced sleep paralysis. It's a truly disturbing thing. I've also woken to seeing spiders and other giant bugs in my bed countless times, for them to only disappear as I start to snap back to reality. But the hallucinations are always so real and vivid. I always find myself jumping out of my bed screaming, throwing pillows at the non-existent bugs. And don't even get me started on the constant nightmares I have. There was one stressful week of school that I was up to my ears in homework with all my classes, and I was admittedly exhausted mentally and physically. With half of my assignments due the next day, which was Friday, I was up extremely late for a school night. It had to be like 3 a.m., and I had to be up in 3 hours. When I finally finished all of my assignments, I literally crashed into bed, and I was out cold faster than I could remember. And that night, I was having a bad dream again. The best I could describe this bizarre dream, I was for some reason in this linear building that I was trying to escape, and in each passing room I kept finding candies, like it was a Halloween attraction or something. But in the dream I was running away from something, and the something I was running away from kept laughing. It was a child's laughter, and it sounded like it was coming from everywhere. What caused me to wake up was when I made it to what was presumed to be the final door of the building. The laughing was the loudest now, and when I opened the door, I woke up in my bed. I couldn't move. It was happening again. Then there was a laughter from the middle of the room. I moved my eyes to focus to the middle of the room. There were 4 people standing in the center of the room. It was like a family, a tall male and female, and then a small boy and girl. They were all holding hands and they were all laughing, looking at me with giant grins on their faces. Impossibly wide grins. And as I felt this tight pressure in my chest, which is common in sleep paralysis, I started to feel like they were getting bigger, or just getting closer, like they were all floating towards me. When my body finally permitted, I threw the sheets off of me and threw my pillows into the middle of the room and screamed. But the pillows hid nothing, as the 4 figures were gone, and the horrible laughing had stopped. I had never experienced a hallucination like that, and I have had sleep paralysis many times. I had to see my doctor the next day, who prescribed me new medication. Since then, I've still had my share of night terrors. but nothing even close to that. When I was 15, I had my first girlfriend. We lived in an upper-class area, very quiet and peaceful streets. My girlfriend Casey also lived 2 blocks away, so I could walk to her house almost nightly. One Thursday night during break, when I had nothing to do, I started my walk over to Casey's house. It was on the later side of the night, but I didn't really have a curfew, so it didn't matter. But pretty soon, I thought I could start hearing noises from around me. And when I say around me, I mean mostly behind me. The first time I heard it, it was the sound of a bush being shaken a bit. I only turned my head to look for a second without stopping. I just started to walk a little faster is all. When I got to the next block, I heard another noise, a twig or a small stick cracking. I stopped this time and turned around. All I saw was the empty street and the bushes that lined up along each property to separate the sidewalks from people's properties. Basically next to the street was a wall of bushes, and I didn't see anyone or anything that could be making these weird sounds. I picked up the pace even more, and I was reaching the home stretch to Casey's house. Of course, there was another sound again, this time more like footsteps. Quick, light footsteps. I turned again without stopping. No one, nothing. I could see Casey's house now. I called, and she picked up right away. I told her how freaked out I was getting because I kept hearing noises. I walked around the bushes surrounding her driveway and stepped onto her property. I noticed her staring out her bedroom window upstairs. She waved at me as she left on the phone, and I waved back. Then she asked me, "Who's that guy right behind you?" I turned right around and saw a fully grown man crouch walking maybe 10 feet in back of me. I screamed and ran for the door and started pounding on it. The man grabbed me and tried to put me in some kind of headlock, but he let go and ran away pretty quickly. Casey's mom opened the door with a look of dismay on her face. She let me in and slammed the door shut as Casey came running over. I was out of breath and felt like my heart was beating 1,000 beats a minute. Casey's mom hugged me, asked a few questions, then called the police to warn of a dangerous man going around town. Casey's mom let me stay over that night for obvious reasons, and she drove me home the next day. It was a dangerously stormy night. Everyone in my family was doing their own thing. I was in my room watching TV, my parents were in the living room watching some comedy show, and my sister was playing video games upstairs. I usually enjoyed stormy nights like this because it made me feel relaxed. I was relaxed until there was a monstrous bang on my window. I jumped up and looked outside. There was someone outside my window, but the large amount of rain pouring down the window kind of blurred his face. He started pounding at my window. It sounded like he was screaming for help. I opened the window just a crack, and he screamed in, "Let me in, I'm hurt." The rain was so loud I had to scream at him to come around front, then I shut my window. I ran outside to the living room to tell my dad that some man who seems to be in distress is screaming for help outside. And then came the knocks and shouts for help outside our front door. My dad was about to open the front door, but I stopped him. I said wait, because I wasn't sure if it was a good idea. Then the phone rang, and on the TV it displayed the caller ID of our next door neighbor. My dad ran to pick it up. When I heard him say "no fucking way," I knew something was wrong. He hung up the phone and said stay away from the door. He didn't explain why. He just went to the window to peek at the front stoop. There is where he said he saw a guy crouched down, pounding on the door, holding some kind of large, sharp tool. My dad yelled through the front door at the man to go away before the cops get here. Then he actually got on the phone with the cops. Eventually the man outside gave up, and he disappeared the next time we checked. When my dad was on the phone with a neighbor, he told my dad that he saw some homeless-looking guy rummaging through his shed and came out with a large chopping axe. The cops found the crazed man wandering around the streets, and it made it in the newspaper a few days later. One night when I was a really young kid, I was in the living room watching my favorite cartoon. I had the TV pretty loud, but I thought I could hear my mom calling my name from downstairs. I called back, "What?" She didn't answer, so I guess she couldn't hear me. I heard her call me again, so I went down to the basement. The lights were off, so halfway down I called for my mom. She didn't answer. I didn't know where she could be calling me from, but one thing was for certain though, she wasn't in the basement. I started going back up the stairs, but before I even got to the top stair, I heard my mom's voice again from down in the basement calling my name. I looked down into the pitch blackness. I ran back up to the top step, turned on the lights, and walked halfway back down, peeking into the basement. I didn't see my mom anywhere down there. Suddenly, I got a huge rush of horror. I ran up the stairs basically crying for my mom. She came rushing down the stairs from upstairs, and I cried to her that something was calling me from downstairs that sounded just like her. She swore to me that she hadn't been calling me. She went down to the basement to check and make me feel better, but I didn't feel better. I'm sure she didn't believe me. Why would she? I was a little kid. But I still know that I heard what I heard. My grandpa recently told me a story. It was about a night he took his dog for a walk. He used to have a small Boston Terrier named Sherry, who he named after an old friend of his who passed away. My grandpa lives like 2 hours from us on a farm, and there's not much that goes on there. He lives with his wife Marianne, who he married like 15 years back. Every day, Marianne would take Sherry for a walk in the morning, and my grandpa would take her for a walk in the evening. On a regular walk during sunset, my grandpa was walking Sherry down the usual dirt path that ran along the woods next to their property. My grandpa passed by another person on the trail who Sherry instinctively barked and pulled towards like most dogs do when they see strangers. My grandpa said hello to the stranger, who had a large hood up, but the stranger just walked past without even batting an eye, so he and the dog kept walking. Sherry kept looking back every so often and barking, however. My grandpa would tell him to shush and yank at the leash to keep him walking. Eventually, my grandpa would turn around to look at what Sherry could be barking at. The stranger who passed him by a few minutes earlier was stalking him from behind a tree in the near distance. My grandpa decided to pick up the pace as fast as possible. At his old age, he always carries pepper spray in his big coat pocket just in case. He was getting closer to the house when suddenly he heard clicks from the leaves on the ground inches behind him. But before he could turn, he felt the warmth of a glove cover his mouth and nose, preventing him from screaming or breathing. My grandpa says he could hear Sherry barking and biting at the stranger, which might have helped in loosening the man's grip a little. My grandpa says he struggled to grab the pepper spray out from his pocket, but when he did, he sprayed it at least 10 times and continued spraying it even after the man who was holding him let go and started to scream. My grandpa came as close as he could to a run to escape back to his house. He was perfectly okay. I grew up in California for the first 14 years of my life. Our neighborhood wasn't the best, namely because it was an area that the Crips were known to reside in. If you don't know, the Crips are members of one of the biggest Los Angeles street gangs. My best friend, who I always called Stevie D, lived 2 doors down. We had other friends, of course, but we would often hang out just he and I. We'd usually ride our bikes together around town or play video games, just basic kid stuff. When we were 12, we were biking around the neighborhood one night and decided to visit a well-known abandoned house. It had been uninhabited for many years because no one would buy it for whatever reason. When we pulled up on our bikes to the front of the house, Stevie pointed to the window and said, "Look." I pushed my bike a little closer to the window and focused my vision on it. I could see someone peeking out the window. I couldn't tell if they were looking at us or not, but it was definitely a person's face sitting between the curtains. It was extremely strange considering the place had been unowned for years. We stared for longer than we should have, perhaps, and noticed something else that was strange. The person didn't move their face at all. We inched a little closer, onto the empty driveway actually. Upon getting closer, it appeared to be a Halloween decoration or something, like a fake head. This meant someone had snuck into the house to put it there. Stevie D and I, being the mischievous kids we used to be, hatched an idea to sneak in through the back somehow and check out the place. We hid our bikes on the side of the house behind an overgrown bush, then snuck into the yard. To our surprise, the back door was already unlocked, but when we came to think of it, it wasn't that surprising considering it seemed someone had already broken in to put that fake head there. We stepped into the house, but we didn't want to turn the lights on and expose the fact that we were in the house. It was dark in there, but not pitch black, so we could make our way through the house. We got to the living room first because we wanted to check out that fake head thing at the window. It smelled really bad in that room though. I picked up the head from the windowsill and immediately dropped it and screamed. I dropped it not because it was surprisingly heavy, but because it also felt like real skin. I saw a dark liquid pouring out from the bottom of the head that was now on the floor. It was blood. It was a real human head. There were 2 cracks in the ceiling above us. Stevie and I looked at each other with our mouths hanging open. We ran for the back door and got back on our bikes to get the hell out of there. Anyone in our immediate area learned pretty soon that the head belonged to a victim of the Crips, who apparently placed the head there as some kind of message. I don't think anyone knew the full story, but there was a good chance whoever placed that head there was still in the house, because Stevie and I both heard cracks in the ceiling above us, as if someone was coming downstairs. Last year, a guy came to my house's door around 9 p.m. He knocked on the door, so I got my mom, and she went out to see who it was. By the way, we live in a rural area, so visits that late are extremely uncommon and strange. The guy talked to my mom about how he was opening a business, asked whether she liked American-made products, then handed her a Clorox container as a sample. He went back to his minivan and opened it to get a quote-unquote vacuum cleaner when my mom saw 5 other men sitting inside. She told me to run and get my phone since we don't have a landline. I couldn't find it, so I got my knife and stood around the corner. She threw the container outside and told them to get the hell off her property, as well as that she was calling the cops. They peeled out of the driveway and we never saw the car again. I've always been an extreme sports person ever since I was little. Mountain climbing, parasailing, scuba diving, though I've always been an avid skier. I'd go upstate skiing at least 10 times a season, sometimes with friends, sometimes alone. My friend, who I'll call Q, agreed to come upstate and go camping with me so we could do some backcountry skiing, which is basically skiing in the backcountry on unmarked or unpatrolled areas outside of a ski resort's boundaries. It was a 3-hour drive, then a decent amount of off-roading to get to where the hills were. I parked my truck at the bottom of a decent-looking area full of hills, but I also stopped there because I couldn't really drive out much further given that there were too many trees. Q and I then proceeded to unload the back of my truck of all our stuff, including ski gear and camping equipment. Then we hiked about a quarter mile, which was an incredible amount of work with all the stuff we were carrying. We found a perfect place to set up camp, right near the bottom of an uphill, and in a bit of a clearing between the trees. Setting up the tent and unloading our sleeping bags and equipment and such was first priority. When all of that was done, we started our hike up the hill to scout the area. We did a decent amount of hiking, but we also got a lot of skiing in. At one point, Q and I lost each other while skiing down a bigger hill. I assumed I'd meet him at the bottom, or just find him eventually. I checked the walkie-talkie just to see if he'd answer, but he didn't, which meant he was probably still going downhill. At some point while I was walking with my skis at the bottom of the hill, I ran into someone, another skier. He sounded very friendly under a ski mask, asking me where the best hills are and if we were camping and such. He had his skis strapped to his orange backpack. I pointed to the hill I just skied down and also pointed in the direction we set up camp. He said he and his wife were trying to find a good place to set up camp near other people, and asked if I could lead him to my campsite. As much as I really didn't want to trek all the way back there, I felt I had to be a good Samaritan and help this man and his wife. I pulled out my walkie again and said into the speaker to Q that I was going back to the campsite for a bit. I started to lead the man who was behind me, when suddenly I started getting some static from another end on the walkie. It seemed someone, probably Q, was trying to talk to me, but the connection was shit. Nothing I could do about that except for come back to this hill afterwards. It took a decent amount of hiking and small talk with the man before we reached the campsite. I turned around to him and smiled under my ski mask, which I realized instantly was pointless. He sounded very thankful for he and his wife. Then I finally asked him, "Where is your wife?" He didn't answer. He started to walk closer to me. At first I thought nothing of it, but for some reason, something about his skis and backpack just struck me. They belonged to Q. For a split second I thought, is this Q? Is he pranking me? But it wasn't possible. The voice was too different from Q. The man was a few mere feet away from me at this point, and he was picking up the pace to a more intimidating approach. I panicked and jumped into the tent to dig for my flare gun in my bag. The man grabbed my leg, which was sticking out from the tent, and then I felt a sharp, intense tingle in my leg, like a severe electric shock, followed by a burning heat feeling. I screamed in pain as I just managed to pull out the flare gun, push aside the door to the vent, and aim it at the man. He immediately backed up with his hands in the air, and that's when I noticed the knife dug deep into my leg. I ordered the man to tell me where my friend was. He answered quickly, saying near the bottom of the hill he found me at. I told the man to stand still while I called 911 to request an immediate rescue. But the man took off quite easily while I was on the phone. There wasn't much I could do with one single flare gun shot. I felt like I was waiting there in the cold with my bleeding leg forever, until finally the reassuring sound of a rescue helicopter swooped overhead, and I shot my flare gun. I cannot believe I was actually picked up by a helicopter, in which I helped locate my friend laying in the snow in the middle of the hill. He was unconscious, and he had also been stabbed twice in the leg, then robbed. He tried talking to me through the walkie-talkie while he was losing consciousness, but the connection was bad. We both went to the hospital, but we're fine today. I lived in a small college town, and my apartment complex was walking distance from the bar/downtown area. One weekday night, I stepped out on our front porch to smoke a cigarette or two. I was up late studying. I brought my textbook with me and laid down on the stairs while I smoked. A girl who I had never met before, but who lived one apartment over on the ground floor, came home from downtown. She was by herself, and you could tell from her walk she had been drinking. She got in her apartment and barely got the door closed before some guy, who came out of nowhere, knocked on her door. She opened, and I noticed he introduced himself, which was weird because it was like 2:30 in the morning. Who comes to a random girl's apartment at that time? So I decided to stay outside and pay attention. They ended up talking for over 10 minutes. She later acknowledged how weird the situation was, but did not know how to end the conversation. He would do the creepiest things, like he reached up and stroked her hair at least 3 times, and he would try to slowly inch his way closer to her in the door. I made a point of being loud with my textbook so he would know I was there, and he disappeared as eerily as he came. We called the cops, and days later they had the girl and I sit with a sketch artist. As soon as the sketch was made public, floods of calls came in. The guy turned out to be a serial rapist who followed lone girls home from bars and pretended to be a cab offering them a ride. This girl just got lucky because she lived so close to the bars, he didn't get a chance to pull the cab routine. I've only used Craigslist once in my life, and the one time I used it, I got a very sour taste in my mouth. Here's why. The guy posted an ad for a ping pong table that I wanted to buy for my roommate and I. We set up a time for me to come pick it up that night. I had to remove the back seats from my truck so that I'd be able to fit the thing. I pulled up in front of the dude's house and texted him saying I'm here. I saw the door open, so I got out from my truck and did a quick speed walk to his front door to greet him. I went for the handshake, but I don't think he saw my arm, so after a few awkward seconds, I put my hand back down. He said in his deep smoker's voice to follow him to the basement. The whole house had a certain distinct smell to it, not exactly a bad or concerning smell, just a cottony, smoky kind of smell. We got to the basement, and there was the ping pong table, right smack in the middle of the room. Suddenly, he said, "Oh shoot, I gotta find the paddles." So he ran back up the stairs and told me to wait right there. I waited for a while down there, assuming he misplaced the paddles and was having a hard time finding them. I started to snoop around his basement a little bit, looking at his pictures and such. It was weird. He had framed pictures sitting on furniture, but they were all pictures of just him, no family members. There was one where he was at least with a dog, but that was pretty much it. I'd say 10 minutes went by and I was still stuck waiting down there, so I started to get even more snoopy. There was a back laundry/storage room in his basement that I started to observe for some reason. There was a drawer to his utility desk that was hanging half open. I pulled it fully open, and it revealed old Polaroid pictures. But these pictures were horrific and disturbing. They were all pictures taken of some girl who was tied to a chair and her mouth covered with tape. There were also yellow folders stacked in a row next to the photos. They were labeled A to Z. I didn't have it in me to open the folders and see what were inside. I took out my phone to take pictures of the contents of the drawer and planned to send it to my friends immediately, but I didn't have any service down there. It was definitely time to go. I ran back to the door at the top of the stairs, but my nightmare only became worse finding out the door was locked. As soon as I tried the doorknob, though, I heard the deep, raspy voice of the man on the other side of the door. He was apologizing, saying the door was accidentally locked and he would go look for the key real quick. I didn't say a word in response. I examined the keyhole closely, ran back down the stairs to the man's utility desk, grabbed 3 screwdrivers of varying sizes, and tried each one in the keyhole for the door. The smallest screwdriver managed to fit in the rectangular-shaped keyhole, allowing me to turn it just enough to unlock and open the door. I didn't stop and look around. I simply ran out the door into my car. I didn't look back at the house. I simply drove to the nearest police station, showed them the pictures, gave them the address, told them where to find the photos, and that was enough for them to start their investigation. A few days later, I got all the information. The man was part of a child pornography trade on the deep web, which was how he made his living apparently. Why he decided to lock me in his basement, that's beyond me. I have not the slightest idea of what he intended on doing with me, but obviously it was not anything good. I used to babysit in my teenage years. When I was 14, I babysat for a 6-year-old boy named Cody once. His parents left me with few instructions other than to order a pizza for dinner and not let him go in their room. They also left me with an interesting comment, that Cody tends to act different than other kids and that he'll talk to himself or his imaginary friend, especially when he played with his toys. So, it was midday, pouring outside. I was watching some old Wipeout show that used to be on TV in the early 2000s. Cody was on the floor playing with his toys that were scattered across the living room. Cody kept using the name Agnes. He would act like he was playing with another kid who was sitting in front of him. One of his toys that were sitting across the room from him activated out of nowhere. I only found it weird because the toy was one of those little cube-like things with the crank where you pull it down and some simulated moving racing background came up on the screen. It was the kind of toy that would take effort to activate, and there it was, activated all by itself. I asked Cody how that was possible. He looked at me and said, "Agnes is playing with it." I have to admit, it was a little disturbing hearing him say that. I picked up the toy and turned it off. That night, in the final hour waiting for his parents to come back, I was in the bathroom washing up when there was a knock at the door. "Cody?" I said. I opened the door. Cody wasn't there. I looked into the hallway for Cody. One of the doors at the end of the hall started to creak open slowly, like really slowly. I turned off the light to the bathroom and walked into the room expecting to see Cody playing around, trying to scare me. Instead, Cody was sitting on the bed in the far corner of the room, looking at me. I asked him who just pushed open the door. "Agnes," he said. Now truly freaked out, I went to pick Cody up off the bed and brought him to the living room, where I spent the rest of my shift until his parents came back. I didn't mention any of the weird things that happened, but when they reached out to me to watch Cody again a few weeks later, I never called them back.